Hey there, story lovers. This is Vision Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Dobby delivered Harry's healer scans to every order member, 3 Apparated to Privet Drive. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Scan. The cupboard under the stairs still smelled the same. Harry hadn't slept in it since he was 11, but sometimes, when the house felt particularly hostile, when Vernon's footsteps in the hallway were too heavy and too slow, the kind of slow that meant he was stopping outside doors, Harry found himself thinking about it. About the dimensions of it. About how he'd once thought that space was normal. He was thinking about it now, lying on his back on the narrow bed in the smallest bedroom, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a Hungarian horntail if you tilted your head and squinted. He hadn't slept properly in 11 days. He knew because he'd been counting, the way you count things when your brain needs something small and manageable to hold on to while everything large and unmanageable circles overhead like vultures. Cedric Diggory had been dead for 32 days. Harry pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, hard, and breathed through his nose until the pressure in his chest backed off enough to let him think about something else. The window was open 2 inches, Vernon's maximum permitted allowance for the summer, as though Harry might somehow escape through a gap that wouldn't admit a large cat. Outside, the Dursleys' garden sat fat and manicured and absurd in the late July heat. Mrs. Number 7 was watering her begonias. A car alarm was going off 3 streets over. The world was continuing to exist with absolutely no acknowledgement of the fact that a 17-year-old Dark Lord had come back to life in a graveyard and killed someone Harry had liked. Harry found that deeply offensive. He rolled onto his side and looked at the Hedwig's empty cage. She was out hunting. She went out most nights now and stayed out longer each time, as if she could sense that the house was not a good place to be enclosed. He didn't blame her. He envied her, honestly, that clean freedom of just going. His ribs ached. They'd been aching since the portkey back from the graveyard, a dull, deep ache that lived just below the surface of everything he did. He'd cracked 2 of them in the second task, and they'd never been seen to properly because Dumbledore had cleared him for the 3rd task, and that had seemed, at the time, more pressing than mentioning that it hurt to breathe too deeply. He hadn't mentioned a lot of things, Harry reflected. He was quite practiced at not mentioning things. He closed his eyes. Didn't sleep. In the kitchen, at 11:30 at night, Dobby stood on the counter beside the refrigerator and watched Harry's bedroom window with the focused stillness of something that had learned, over a long time, to make itself invisible. Dobby had large, tennis ball eyes that missed very little. He had been watching Harry Potter for 4 years with those eyes, since before Harry Potter had known he existed, technically, since Dobby had been watching from Malfoy Manor and worrying at the state of the world with every piece of intelligence that filtered through to him. He had done what he could, in those early years. The letter interception had been well-intentioned, if poorly received. The bludger had been a catastrophic misjudgment that Dobby still thought about with deep shame in the quiet of the night, though he maintained, privately, to himself, that the intention had been sound even if the execution had been disastrous. Since then, he had been more careful. More watchful. More patient. Dobby did not receive wages from Harry Potter. He received wages from Hogwarts, 1 galleon a week, which he saved in a small clay pot under his hammock in the kitchens. He spent very little of it. He did not need much. What he needed was to be useful, and what useful looked like, right now, was this, a small scroll of parchment in his hands, rolled tightly and sealed with a healer's mark in green wax, and 16 identical copies of it in a canvas bag beside him. He had been planning this for 2 weeks. The decision had not been impulsive. Dobby was not impulsive, he was frequently dramatic, and occasionally reckless, but those were different things entirely. He had thought about this carefully, from every angle, in the methodical way that house elves thought about service. What does this person need, and what stands between them and it, and what can I do to remove what stands in the way? What Harry Potter needed was for someone to see. Dobby had seen. But Dobby was a house elf, and there were limits, there had always been limits, to what a house elf's word was worth in the wizarding world. He had no illusions about that. A house elf saying the boy is unwell, the boy is not being cared for, the boy's ribs are cracked and his growth is stunted and there is a scar on his back that should not be there, that was easily dismissed. That was "Oh, Dobby, don't be dramatic, Harry is fine, Dumbledore has arranged everything." A healer's diagnostic scroll was harder to dismiss. He'd gone to St. Mungo's on a Tuesday afternoon in early July, wearing a tea cozy as a hat and carrying a basket of cleaning supplies that got him into the service corridors without a second glance. House elves moved through the infrastructure of the wizarding world like water through pipes, useful, invisible, everywhere. He had found healer Gretchen Marsh on her break in the third-floor staff room, a woman he knew by reputation from the Hogwarts kitchens. She'd been a school healer before St. Mungo's, and she had a reputation for being, in the words of the Hogwarts elves, one of the ones who actually looks. Dobby had explained himself with great precision and no small amount of dignity. He had made his case. He had shown her his contract of free service to Hogwarts, which established him as an independent elf of good standing. He had explained who Harry Potter was and what Dobby had observed over 4 years. He had not cried, though it had been a near thing at several points. Healer Marsh had been quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she'd said, "How would you get him here?" "Harry Potter cannot leave the house," Dobby had said. "They watch him. And Harry Potter would not come even if he could. Harry Potter does not like to make trouble." She'd looked at him with something that was either compassion or pity, and Dobby had decided to treat it as compassion. "I can give you a diagnostic kit. A self-administering one, they're used for patients in the field. It requires only proximity to the patient while they sleep. The scroll it produces is the same as any St. Mungo's diagnostic. It's legally admissible documentation." "Then I would like that very much," Dobby had said. It had taken him 9 more days to administer it safely, to wait for a night when Harry slept deeply enough, which was rare, the boy slept poorly and fitfully and woke at small sounds, and to cast the diagnostic proximity charm over Harry's sleeping form without waking him. Harry had stirred once, and Dobby had frozen on the windowsill for 4 full minutes before Harry subsided and went still again. The scroll the kit produced had printed itself out in Healer Marsh's office the following morning and she had sent Dobby a copy by owl that afternoon. Dobby had read it once. Then he'd sat down on his hammock and held the scroll in both hands and stared at the far wall of his small corner of the Hogwarts kitchens for a very long time. Then he'd gone to the writing desk and started making copies. The diagnostic scroll was 4 pages long. On the first page, under constitutional assessment, it noted, "Subject presents with significant caloric deficit consistent with prolonged undernourishment, estimated 30 to 35% below recommended dietary intake for subject's age and size over a sustained period of 3 or more years. Subject's height and weight fall in the 3rd percentile for males of his age, adjusted for nutrition projections suggest subject would otherwise present in the 65th to 72nd percentile. Bone density reduced in multiple areas consistent with childhood malnutrition." On the second page, under musculoskeletal, it listed, "Healed fractures, improperly set left radius, healed, age 7 to 8, consistent with impact injury, right index and middle fingers, healed, age 9 to 10, consistent with crushing injury or impact, ribs 4 and 6 on the right lateral, healed, suboptimal alignment, recent, within last 2 months, old fracture evidence in the left collarbone, healed, age unknown, consistent with repeated stress or single high-impact event." There was more. The scroll went on. It noted sleep deprivation indicators in the subject's magical core readings, a kind of harmonic irregularity that healers associated with chronic rest disruption. It noted 3 healed lacerations on the subject's back, 2 on his hands, 1 on his left shin, all consistent with sustained physical impact from a narrow implement. It noted signs of past chemical irritant exposure, a clinical way of saying he was locked in a cupboard where cleaning supplies were also stored. The scroll noted all of these things in the flat, precise language of medical documentation, which somehow made it worse. There was no outrage in the language. Just the numbers. Just the record of a body that had been used as a place where consequences were deposited, like a jug that keeps being filled past the point it should hold. Dobby had memorized the relevant sections. He did not need to reread it to be angry. He had simply concluded that other people needed to read it too, specifically, the people who had decided that this house, these people, this arrangement, was an acceptable place for Harry Potter to be. He had assembled his list carefully. The Order of the Phoenix had 17 active members he was aware of, including 2 whose addresses he'd had to research. He'd used the Hogwarts Owlery at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday, moving quietly among the sleeping owls, and dispatched scrolls to Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, Alastor Moody, Nymphadora Tonks, Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, care of a specific cave system in Scotland that Dobby had located by following the trail of owl deliveries to Harry's post, Arthur Weasley, Molly Weasley, Bill Weasley, Mundungus Fletcher, Emmeline Vance, Daedalus Diggle, Alpheus Doge, Sturgis Podmore, Hestia Jones, Kingsley Shacklebolt and, after a moment of deliberation, Severus Snape, because Dobby believed in thoroughness even where it was personally unpleasant. He had attached a single note to each scroll. The note read, "This is what the house at Privet Drive has done to Harry Potter. Dobby is not asking for anything. Dobby is only ensuring that everyone knows." He had signed it with his name, in careful, looping letters, because Dobby did not do cowardly things anonymously. That had been 6 hours ago. Remus Lupin read his copy at the kitchen table of a safe house in Exeter at 9:20 in the morning, and he did not put it down for a very long time. He read it the way you read something when you are hoping that each new line will somehow walk back what the previous line said. He read it slowly, and then quickly, and then he set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the far wall. The kitchen was small and yellow, bright yellow, the cheerful yellow of a house that had been decorated by someone who believed in the redemptive power of color, and Remus had always found it faintly ironic to be sitting in this kitchen while doing order work because the order's work was categorically not cheerful. He noticed the yellow now. He felt it, specifically, as an affront. He picked up the scroll again. His eyes went to the bone density section. Then to the healed fractures. Then to the lacerations on the back, consistent with sustained physical impact from a narrow implement, and he put it down again. He thought about the last time he'd seen Harry, at the end of 4th year, just before the train. Harry had been pale and quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet, it had something drawn in it, something used up. Remus had thought it was grief. He'd thought, of course it is, he watched Cedric die, give him time. He'd said something careful and gentle about time and grief, and Harry had looked at him with those green eyes and nodded in the way that meant he was being polite rather than actually comforted, and Remus had thought give him space, he'll come around, you'll talk properly this summer. He hadn't gone to Privet Drive. He'd been told not to, Dumbledore had said Harry needed quiet, needed normalcy, needed the protection of the Blood Ward more than he needed company. And Remus had accepted that because Remus accepted things. Remus was exceptionally good at accepting things that made him feel terrible, and reframing the feeling as reasonable caution or respecting boundaries or trusting in Albus's experience. He stood up from the table. Sat back down. Stood up again. He picked up his wand. Put it in his pocket. Picked up his traveling cloak from the back of the chair. He was at the door when he stopped and thought, very clearly, Sirius will have gotten this by now too. That changed the calculus somewhat. He turned back, grabbed the scroll, and disapparated. Sirius had gotten his copy 40 minutes earlier. He was currently sitting in the mouth of a cave on the Scottish coast with a large black dog's fur still fading back into his own skin. He'd been out running, which was what he did when the walls of whatever temporary space he was inhabiting started pressing in, and he had read the scroll twice, and then he had transformed and run for another 20 minutes. And then he had transformed back and read it a third time in case he had misread something. He hadn't. The note from Dobby was beside him, held down by a rock against the sea wind. This is what the house at Privet Drive has done to Harry Potter. Sirius had known Dobby since Harry's 2nd year, known of him, at least, the way you know of people through second-hand accounts. He'd known the house elf had attached himself to Harry. He'd thought, in the abstract, protective way of someone who was technically a fugitive and couldn't do much practically. Good, someone's watching out for him. He had not thought good, someone is documenting it, because he had not needed documentation. He had needed to believe that Harry was okay. He'd chosen to believe it, which was different, and he was sitting with that distinction now, and it was uncomfortable in the way of things that are true and that you've been avoiding. He read the part about the height and weight again. 30 to 35% below recommended dietary intake over a sustained period of 3 or more years. Harry was small. Sirius had noticed that Harry was small, smaller than James had been at his age, smaller than Sirius himself had been, and he had thought, different builds, takes after Lily's side perhaps, and he's had a stressful couple of years, that affects growth, doesn't it? He had thought a lot of things, Sirius realized, that allowed him to not think the other thing. The lacerations on the back. Consistent with sustained physical impact from a narrow implement. A belt. A switch. A cane. The language was medical and restrained, and the thing it was describing was not. Sirius got to his feet. The sea wind was cold and sharp and smelled like salt and distance. He looked at the water for a moment, grey and green and going on forever, and he thought about James Potter, who had been his best friend in the world, who was dead, whose son had been beaten with a narrow implement while living under a blood ward that was supposed to protect him, while Sirius had been in a cave thinking about whether to risk getting more food from the village below. He thought about Dumbledore, who had placed Harry there. Who had said the blood ward is essential. Sirius, I cannot explain the full reasoning, but you must trust me. Sirius had spent 12 years in Azkaban. He was not running out of capacity for rage. If anything, Azkaban had stripped away the layers that most people built up over a lifetime to moderate their immediate responses, and what was left was something fairly direct and uncomplicated. He transformed. He ran. He ran east, toward Surrey, covering the ground between Scotland and the edge of the magical boundary with the kind of focused, ground-eating speed that the Grim, the Death Omen, the Harbinger, the thing that children's stories warned you about, moved with when it had decided where it was going. Nymphadora Tonks was in the middle of making tea when her scroll arrived. The owl came in through her kitchen window with the efficiency of something that had been given very precise instructions and knocked her mug off the counter in the process. She caught it with a reflexive accio before it hit the floor, set it back, gave the owl a look, took the scroll, broke the green healer seal, and unrolled it. She read standing at the kitchen counter with her tea going cold beside her. Tonks was 23 years old and had been an Auror for 2 years. She had, in those 2 years, processed crime scenes, interviewed victims of dark curses, and sat through briefings on what Voldemort's followers had done during the First War. She was not easily shaken. She had developed, in the way that people in her profession did, a kind of functional partition in her mind that allowed her to read documentation like this and process it analytically without the emotional response derailing the analysis. The partition held for about 2.5 pages. The third page was where it listed the historical injuries, the old fractures, the lacerations, the timeline of them, the ages those injuries had been sustained at. 7 years old. 9 years old. The years before Harry Potter had known he was a wizard, before anyone in the wizarding world had come for him, before there had been any reason to hurt him beyond simple cruelty. Her tea went cold and she didn't notice. She was an Auror. She thought like an Auror, even when she didn't want to. Her mind was already constructing the shape of the thing, the pattern of it, who had known what when, what had been reported and what hadn't, what the legal frameworks for this looked like, who bore responsibility. She was already thinking about it in those terms because thinking about it in the other terms, in the terms of this as a child, he was 7 years old, he lived in a cupboard, was not immediately useful and she couldn't afford to just feel it right now. She put her tea in the sink. Got her cloak. She looked at the note from Dobby again before she pocketed it. Dobby is not asking for anything. Dobby is only ensuring that everyone knows. Bloody hell, Dobby, she said to the empty kitchen, with something that was admiration and grief and fury all at once. She disapparated. She arrived at the Exeter safe house 2 minutes before Remus, which gave her just enough time to find that it was empty and realize, with the particular clarity of someone who knows a person well enough to predict them, exactly where Sirius had gone. She left a note on the kitchen table, "Gone to Surrey, catch up," and disapparated again. She arrived on the pavement of Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, at 23 minutes past 10 in the morning, a Tuesday in late July, beneath a flat white English sky that offered no dramatic weather whatsoever, just the dull heat of summer and the smell of cut grass and the muffled noise of a television from one of the houses nearby. Number 4 was the third house on the right. She knew the address. It was in the Order's records, the protected location that you weren't supposed to use without Dumbledore's authorization. She looked at it. It looked very ordinary. That was the thing about ordinary houses, they were very good at looking ordinary. That was, in fact, their primary function. She heard the crack of apparition behind her. Remus appeared at her left shoulder, looking like he hadn't slept, which was his standard appearance, but today it had a different quality to it, the kind of sleeplessness that comes from being very awake rather than from not sleeping. He had the scroll in his hand. He looked at the house. "You got here fast," he said. "I was closer." She looked at him. "You read it?" "3 times. Where's Sirius?" As if in answer to the question, a large black dog came around the corner at the end of the street at a loping, ground-covering run and stopped directly in front of them. It was the size of a small pony. Its eyes were pale gray and completely human in the way that Padfoot's eyes had always been human, because the man behind them was not particularly good at hiding what he was. The dog looked at number 4. "Sirius," Remus said. "I need you to be calm." The dog looked at him. "I mean it. Harry is in there. We need to be calm and deliberate and not set anything on fire, metaphorically or literally." The dog continued to look at him with an expression that communicated, quite clearly, that it was not making any promises. "Brilliant," Tonks said. "Right. Let's go, then." She walked up the garden path of number 4, Privet Drive with her wand in her hand and knocked on the door. Inside, Harry heard the knock. He'd been sitting at his desk for the last hour, attempting to write a letter to Ron and getting as far as Dear Ron before running out of things he felt capable of saying. The letter-writing problem was not a composition problem. It was a depth problem. Everything he could think of to say went too far down, hit something that was not appropriate for a letter, and he'd been skating along the surface for 32 days trying not to break through. He heard his uncle's voice from downstairs. "Petunia. There's someone at the door." A pause. Footsteps. Then Vernon, louder, "I'll get it myself." Harry heard the front door open. He heard a silence that had a particular texture to it, the kind of silence that happens when someone sees something unexpected on their doorstep. Then Tonks's voice, bright and completely unapologetic, "Good morning. We're here for Harry Potter. We'll need to come in." Harry was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand. He heard Vernon's intake of breath, the specific intake that preceded either a sentence beginning with "now, see here" or one beginning with "I will not have," and then he heard another voice, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. "Remus. Mr. Dursley. I strongly suggest you step back." And then a third sound that wasn't a voice at all, a low, continuous sound from a dog that was not growling, exactly, but was producing a frequency that communicated something very specific about the dog's intentions if the door was not opened further. Harry opened his bedroom door and went to the top of the stairs. Vernon was standing in the open doorway in his bathrobe, blocky and red-faced, doing the human equivalent of a car trying to accelerate while its brakes are on. Tonks was on the doorstep in a purple cloak with her wand visible at her hip. Behind her, Remus, looking controlled in the deliberate way that was its own kind of warning. And at the garden gate, because presumably Remus had asked him to stay there for the moment, Padfoot sat like a sentinel, watching the door with those gray human eyes. Petunia appeared from the kitchen doorway, took one look at the assembled party, and went completely still. "Harry," Tonks said, looking up at him on the stairs with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally not neutral at all. Can you come down here, please? He came down the stairs. He was wearing jeans that were slightly too large and a t-shirt that had been Dudley's 4 sizes of Dudley ago, and his ribs ached and he was barefoot, and he realized, coming down the stairs with Remus and Tonks looking at him and his uncle going puce beside the door, that something had shifted. Something had changed in the room before he'd entered it. He looked at Remus. Remus was looking at him with the particular expression that Harry had learned to recognize, the expression where Remus was doing the internal equivalent of very careful, controlled breathing. "What's happened?" Harry said. "We'll explain," Remus said. "Why don't we? What is going on?" Vernon found his voice at last, loud and blunt as a hammer. "You can't just come to a man's home and, Mr. Dursley." Tonks turned to look at him, and something in the quality of her attention made Vernon stop talking. She was not loud. She was not threatening, in any obvious way. She simply looked at him the way that someone looks at a thing they have already thoroughly assessed and formed a final opinion of. "You can have this conversation now, or you can have a different conversation with the DMLE later this week. Your choice, but I'd suggest now." Vernon looked at Petunia. Petunia looked at her hands. "What's the DMLE?" Dudley said from the kitchen doorway. Nobody had noticed him appear. "Department of Magical Law Enforcement," Tonks said. "Like police, but for what happened here." The silence that followed had several different layers in it. Harry was looking at Tonks. Remus was looking at Harry. Petunia was still looking at her hands. Vernon's face had gone through red and come out the other side into something more mottled. "Can someone," Harry said, with the careful precision of someone whose control over their voice is a recently developed skill, "tell me what is actually happening?" Remus pulled a scroll from inside his cloak and held it out. Harry took it. He looked at the healer's seal in green wax for a moment, the crossed wand and bone symbol of St. Mungo's, and broke it and unrolled it. He read. He read it standing in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, in his too large jeans and his dead man's t-shirt, barefoot on the linoleum floor, with Vernon 3 feet to his right and Remus and Tonks on the doorstep and Padfoot at the gate, and he read what his body had been doing for the last 10 years, recorded in the flat clinical language of medical documentation. He was quiet for a very long time. He got to the section on healed injuries. He read about the lacerations. He read about the old fracture in his collarbone, healed, age unknown, and he had an extremely specific memory, suddenly, of being 9 years old and falling off the counter in the kitchen where he wasn't supposed to be while trying to get a glass of water, and the sound his shoulder had made when he hit the floor, and how he told himself it was fine because the alternative was telling Vernon, who had been the one who told him to get down and not to touch anything and who would have viewed the injury as an inconvenience rather than an emergency. He lowered the scroll. He looked at Petunia. Petunia looked at him and her face did something complicated that it had never done before in Harry's memory, some kind of implosion around the eyes, something that was either guilt or the architectural remnant of where guilt had once been before it was built over. Harry didn't say anything to her. There was nothing in him that was interested in making this easier for her right now. He looked at Remus. "How did you get this?" "Dobby," Remus said. Of course it was Dobby. Harry thought about the tiny elf who had been watching over him, quietly, for 4 years. Who had done inadvisable things with spectacular commitment in the name of Harry's well-being. Who had apparently now obtained a medical diagnostic scroll and sent it to. He looked at Remus again. "How many people got this?" "Every order member," Tonks said. Harry absorbed that. He looked down at the scroll again, at the numbers and the clinical language and the record of things that he had individually, carefully, arranged himself not to think about too directly. "All right," he said. His voice was very steady. He was slightly surprised by that. "I'd like to pack my things." "Yes," Remus said. "I think that's a very good idea." "You will not," Vernon started. "Mr. Dursley," Tonks said, and she didn't raise her voice even slightly, "I would like you to very carefully consider your next sentence." Vernon looked at her wand, which was now in her hand and pointing at the floor, very casually, in the way that professional people handle weapons when they're not currently using them but would like you to know that they exist. He didn't finish the sentence. Harry turned and went back up the stairs. He could hear Remus and Tonks stepping inside the house, the sound of it, the specific sound of people who had a right to be somewhere walking into it, and he could hear Padfoot's claws on the garden path, which meant Sirius had given up waiting at the gate. He went into his room and stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at it. The water-stained Hungarian horntail on the ceiling. The empty owl cage. The single shelf of magical textbooks, the broken model of the solar system Hermione had given him for Christmas 2 years ago that he'd never had the heart to throw away even though it was irreparably cracked, the old Nimbus 2000 that didn't fly anymore but that he'd kept anyway because there was something important about keeping things. The narrow bed with its thin mattress. He had slept in this room for 4 years. He had come back to it after first year and second year and third year and fourth year, each year a little different, each return to this room a return to a version of himself that he'd been trying to leave behind. He had woken up from nightmares in this room and pressed his face into the thin pillow and waited for morning. He had read by the light of the street lamp outside when he wasn't allowed to use his wand. He had been hungry in this room and cold in this room, and in this room he had practiced being someone who didn't need things, because needing things at number 4 was an invitation for those things to be taken away. He got his trunk from under the bed. He packed with methodical efficiency, because he'd gotten good at it over the years, the way you get good at things you do repeatedly. Books. Invisibility cloak. Firebolt, which he assembled from where it was hidden in sections under a loose floorboard that Vernon had never found. Photo album. Wand, which he'd had on him, it was always on him, it had been on him every day this summer because some things you don't put down. He was pulling on his shoes when he heard them downstairs. Not a conversation. A reckoning. He could hear Sirius's voice, not the bark of someone losing control, but something lower and colder, which was actually worse. He could hear Vernon attempting to bluster and the bluster dying on each attempt like a fire that keeps getting rained on. He could hear Petunia making a sound that might be crying, which he was not, right now, in a position to feel anything about. He hefted his trunk and went to the top of the stairs and looked down. Sirius was in his human form, he transformed somewhere between the gate and the hallway, apparently, and he was standing in the middle of the sitting room, and he was not large, exactly, Sirius Black, he was lean and weathered and grey-streaked from Azkaban, but he took up more space than his physical dimensions accounted for in the way that some people do. He was looking at Vernon with the focus of someone who has organized a great deal of feeling into something very precise and is now deploying it with intention. The question I keep coming back to, Sirius said, conversationally, is what you thought was going to happen. Not what you wanted to happen. Not your feelings about magic or abnormality or any of that. Just what you thought. Vernon said nothing. His face was doing something unfamiliar, which was the face of a man who is not used to being afraid. Because I've had 11 years, Sirius continued, to think about what happened to the people I loved. And I've had a lot of time to consider what I missed and what I should have done differently. And the thing I keep coming back to is that James Potter trusted you. Petunia, he glanced at her, briefly, and then looked away as if he couldn't sustain it, was Lily's sister. I thought, that meant something. That there was something in that, some protection beyond the magic. He stopped. Looked at the scroll, which was in his hand. Then at Vernon. There wasn't, was there, he said. It wasn't a question. Now see here, Vernon said, without any force behind it, because the blustering bluster mechanism had fully failed. I'm not finished, Sirius said, with the absolute quiet of someone who has given up on volume as an instrument of communication. Harry came down the stairs. Sirius looked up at him, and something moved across his face, something raw and quick that was there and then controlled. You all right? Sirius asked, which was, Harry noted, a fundamentally stupid question in the circumstances, but also the right one to ask. Getting there, Harry said. Can we go? Very much yes, Tonks said from the kitchen doorway. She had clearly been making tea, which Harry thought was an extremely Tonks thing to do in the middle of a reckoning. She held a mug out to him. He took it. It was hot and strong and he hadn't had a proper cup of tea in 11 days and it was, in that moment, one of the better things that had happened to him in recent memory. There are things that need to be addressed, Remus said to the room, to Vernon and Petunia specifically, but also to the room. Formally. This doesn't end here. There will be a conversation with the appropriate people, and that conversation will happen soon. Vernon had gone a color that Harry thought probably had a medical name. Petunia was sitting in the armchair by the window, her chair, the one she always sat in, and she was looking at Harry with that same complicated expression she'd had in the hallway. He was all I had left of her, Petunia said. It came out very quietly, and it was unclear if she was talking to the room or to herself. Sirius looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. That's what makes it worse. Harry picked up his trunk. He looked around the sitting room, the horrible horse brass ornaments, the family photos that never included him, the carpet that smelled like Dudley's trainers and too much air freshener. He looked at it all with the clear-eyed detachment of someone who is closing a chapter and knows it. He walked out the front door of number 4, Privet Drive, into the flat July morning, and he did not look back. Dobby was waiting on the garden path. The small elf was standing very straight, his ears very still, his great eyes very serious. He was wearing what appeared to be a tea cozy on his head and a dishcloth with a cheerful pattern of ducks as a sort of toga, and he was holding his hands clasped in front of him with the dignity of someone who has done a thing and is not going to apologize for it. Harry looked at him. Dobby sent the scrolls, Harry said. Yes, Dobby said. Dobby sent the scrolls. Harry crouched down so they were at a level. He looked at Dobby's face, the earnest, serious, enormous-eyed face that had been attached to someone who had been watching over him, quietly, without being asked, for 4 years. He thought about what it must have taken. Not just the obtaining of the diagnostic kit and the careful midnight administration of it and the 16 copies dispatched from the Ollery at 3 in the morning. He thought about the years before that. The watching. The worrying. The working within the limits of what a house elf could do and still finding something that could not be ignored. Thank you, Harry said. Dobby's chin went up slightly. His eyes were very bright. Harry Potter deserves to be seen, Dobby said. Dobby decided that someone would make sure of it. Harry put his hand briefly on Dobby's shoulder, small, thin-boned, absolutely solid in the way of something that has decided what it is. He stood up. Sirius, Remus, and Tonks came out of the house behind him, Tonks levitating Harry's trunk. The door of number 4 closed behind them. They walked down the garden path, through the gate, and onto the pavement of Privet Drive in the ordinary Tuesday morning sunshine. Mrs. Number 7 had gone inside. The car alarm had stopped. The street was quiet. 3 cracks of apparition. A soft pop from a house elf. The street was empty. Number 4 stood as it had always stood, ordinary and unremarkable and full of what it had done, in the summer heat, behind its neatly painted door. Chapter 2, The Reckoning. They landed in the back garden of Grimmauld Place. Not inside, the Fidelius charm still required the address to be communicated in writing, and there was some procedural question about Harry's access in the wake of Sirius's re-escape that hadn't been formally resolved. Tonks touched the garden wall, muttered something, and a door appeared in the brick that Harry was fairly sure hadn't been there a moment ago. She pushed it open. "Welcome to the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix," she said, with the air of someone showing people to a table at a restaurant that has received mixed reviews. Harry looked at Grimmauld Place for the first time. The back of it was tall and grim and Victorian in the way of houses that were designed to project seriousness rather than welcome, which was to say it looked exactly like what it was. The garden was barely a garden, more of a concrete yard with ambitions, a few dead plants in pots, a stone bird bath that had presumably given up on birds years ago. "It's better inside," Remus said, which Harry noticed was not a strong endorsement. "It's really not," Tonks said, "but there's a kitchen." Sirius had already gone through the door. Harry followed with Dobby at his shoulder, and the house swallowed them. The kitchen was in the basement, low-ceilinged, stone-floored, a long wooden table running most of its length that looked as though it had hosted arguments. The walls were hung with things that were probably decorative in a previous century and were now primarily disturbing. An ancient range took up most of one wall, throwing out heat that the rest of the house seemed designed to absorb and neutralize. But there was a kettle on the range, and there were chairs, and right now that was sufficient. Tonks deposited Harry's trunk by the stairs with a controlled levitation that barely wobbled. She'd been concentrating visibly, Harry noticed, more than the task required, which meant she was keeping herself busy on purpose. Remus sat down at the table and looked at his hands. Sirius stood at the range with his back to the room, and from the set of his shoulders Harry could read him the way you read someone you've been watching from a distance for years, trying to know from the outside what you couldn't know from the inside. Harry sat down. Dobby went immediately to the range and began investigating its operation with the focused authority of an elf encountering a new kitchen, which Harry found obscurely comforting. "The Order will call a meeting," Remus said. "Not a question." "Already?" Harry said. "The scrolls went out this morning. They'll have called one by now." Remus looked up. "Dumbledore will want to discuss what's happened." "What has happened," Harry said, "is that someone sent out a document. The document describes things that have been happening for 11 years. What exactly does Dumbledore need to discuss about that?" The kitchen went very quiet except for the range and Dobby's soft investigation of the cupboards. Remus looked at him steadily. "He'll want to talk about what comes next. Where you stay." The Blood Ward is gone," Sirius said, without turning around. "He's not going back. That conversation is over before it starts." "Sirius, Remus." Sirius turned. His face was controlled in the way that Azkaban had made it, not calm, but organized, the way a battlefield is organized, everything positioned with intent. "He is not going back to that house. Not for a blood ward, not for a protective charm, not for any reason. If Albus walks in here and suggests it, you'll what?" Remus said, and it came out tired rather than challenging. "I'll remind him," Sirius said very precisely, "what it says on page 2 of that scroll. Specifically the section about the implement." The quiet came back. Harry looked at the table. He was aware of all of them trying not to look at him too directly, in the particular way that people who care about you do when they're worried about what direct attention will feel like. He appreciated the instinct. He did not, currently, need protection from eye contact. "You can look at me," he said. "I'm fine." "Harry," Tonks started. "I'm not saying nothing happened," Harry said. "I'm saying I'm still here and I can handle people looking at me. I've been handling it for 10 years. He paused. 11, actually. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Tonks pulled out the chair beside him and sat down and said, "Right. So. Practical things." She had a piece of parchment in front of her and a quill that she'd produced from her cloak pocket with the casual efficiency of someone who is always carrying a quill. "You need a healer." "I'm not an argument," she said pleasantly. "Statement of fact. Gretchen Marsh at St. Mungo's did the diagnostic. I'm going to ask her to come here rather than the other way around, because I'd rather not parade you through a public hospital right now. She's discreet. She was also very clearly not happy about what the diagnostic showed, so she'll want to see it addressed." She looked at him. "Okay." Harry thought about arguing and then didn't. "Okay. Good. Second, food. Real food, regularly, starting now." She looked at Dobby. "Dobby, Dobby already knows what Harry Potter needs," Dobby said from inside a lower cupboard, his voice slightly muffled. "Dobby has been researching nutritional restoration for wizards for 2 weeks. Of course you have," Tonks said, and she wrote something on her parchment that Harry thought was probably Dobby, sorted. Third, she looked at Harry directly. Have you slept recently? Some. How much is some? Some is, some. Harry. 4 hours last night. Maybe 5. I don't really, he stopped. Sleep's been difficult. Right. She wrote something. I'm going to get a dreamless sleep potion from the order supplies. 1 night's worth to start, because that stuff is habit-forming and we're not trading one problem for another. Okay. Harry looked at her. He'd met Tonks once before, briefly, at the end of 4th year. She'd been pointed out to him by Moody at King's Cross, part of the subtle security presence that he'd been told about after the fact. He hadn't spoken to her. He'd had no particular impression of her. He was forming one now. It was largely positive. Okay, he said. Remus had been watching this exchange with something on his face that wasn't quite relief, because relief was too simple for what it was. It was more like, the specific expression of someone who has been carrying a weight they couldn't put down and have just seen someone offer to help carry it. He was still tense around the shoulders. He was going to be tense for a while, Harry suspected. That was just Remus's architecture. Can I ask a question? Harry said. You can ask anything you like, Sirius said. He'd moved from the range and was now sitting at the table, which was progress of a kind. Who's going to be at this order meeting? Remus considered. Most of the full members. Dumbledore, certainly. Moody. McGonagall. The Weasleys, Arthur and Molly, probably Bill. He paused. Snape. Harry absorbed this. Snape. He's a member. He got the scroll. I know he got the scroll. Harry thought about Snape reading the diagnostic scroll and had a feeling he couldn't fully identify, something between discomfort and a strange, dark humor. What's his involvement going to look like? Hard to say, Remus said carefully. He's complicated. He hates me, Harry said. He has complicated feelings. He calls me arrogant and deducted points from me for breathing and made my potions lessons the worst hours of my week for 4 years, Harry said. That's not complicated, that's just hostile. He paused. But fine. He's in the order, he'll be there. I'm just noting it. Sirius made a sound that was technically not a word. Sirius, Remus said. I didn't say anything. You made a sound. People make sounds. Tonks put her quill down and looked at both of them with the expression of someone managing a complex situation. Can we? Yes, the Snape situation is a thing, we can come back to that, but right now I'd like to figure out which room Harry's in before Molly Weasley arrives and tries to reorganize all of us. Mrs. Weasley's coming. Harry said. She got the scroll too, Remus said. I expect she's been cooking since 7 this morning. Harry thought about Molly Weasley, who fed people as a primary emotional response to everything. He thought about the burrow and the noise and the warmth of it, and then he thought about the scroll, and he thought about Molly Weasley reading the section on caloric deficits and the healed fractures, and he thought that whatever was currently happening in the burrow's kitchen was probably loud. I'd like to see her, he said. And the others. They'll be here, Sirius said. Ron and Hermione, are they coming? I don't know yet. That depends on Molly. Sirius looked at the table. Harry. I need to say something, and I want to say it now, before the meeting, before Dumbledore, before all of it. Harry waited. Sirius looked up. I should have come sooner. Not today, I mean over the last month. Over the last 4 years, if we're being honest, but specifically this summer. I knew something wasn't right. I told myself it was the blood ward, I told myself you were safer there than anywhere else, I told myself Albus had it in hand. He stopped. I was wrong. And I knew I was wrong, on some level, and I told myself something easier than what I knew. That's on me. Not on anyone else. Harry looked at him for a moment. At Sirius Black, who had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit and come out of it still fundamentally himself, which was an act of survival so total it bordered on the miraculous, and who was sitting at a kitchen table in his dead family's house being direct about his failures with the specific courage of someone who has had to learn courage the hard way. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not angry at you. You could be." "I could be angry at a lot of people for a lot of things," Harry said. "I'm choosing to save the energy for the things that are actually worth being angry about." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Then, when did you get wise?" "I've been thinking clearly for about an hour," Harry said. "Don't get used to it." Tonks laughed, a quick, genuine laugh that broke something in the room, and Remus smiled for the first time since Privet Drive, and the kitchen of Grimmauld Place became, briefly, something other than grim. The order meeting was called for 3 o'clock. Between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, several things happened in rapid succession. Healer Marsh arrived at 11:30, a compact, gray-haired woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the brisk, unsentimentally kind manner of a doctor who has been practicing long enough to stop apologizing for hard conversations. She examined Harry in the bedroom Sirius had assigned him, second floor, south-facing, the only room in the house that didn't have something disturbing on the walls because Sirius had apparently cleared it specifically. She did not wince. She did not make sounds of distress. She just looked, and tested, and noted things on her own parchment, and said, when she was done, "Right. The ribs need resetting properly, they've been healing in a poor position and it'll cause you trouble in about 3 years if we don't address it now. The bone density we can improve with a nutritional restoration potion taken daily for 6 weeks. The sleep disruption is partly habitual and partly residual magical stress from what happened at the end of your 4th year, and there are 3 things we can do about that, with different trade-offs, and I'd like you to choose rather than me choosing for you." Harry appreciated the choice. He said so. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "You've had enough of other people deciding what's best for you. I gathered that from the file." She said it simply, without making a big moment of it, which was the correct approach. The rib resetting was unpleasant. Not agonizing, she was very good at what she did, but unpleasant in the specific way of things being corrected that have been wrong for long enough to feel normal. He breathed through it. Dobby, who had materialized in the room without anyone noticing, produced a glass of cold water at exactly the right moment, which was when Harry needed it most and before he had thought to ask. "You're good at that," Harry told him afterward. "Dobby has had practice," Dobby said, with a dignity that contained several years' worth of careful, unacknowledged attention. Molly Weasley arrived at 1:30 and the house changed. It was impossible to describe exactly how it changed, except that it got louder and warmer and more full of the smell of food, and a large portion of the order's preparation time for the 3 o'clock meeting was spent in the kitchen with everyone eating the things she'd brought and the things Dobby was preparing in parallel, the two of them operating around each other in the kitchen with the particular choreography of people who share a primary language even if they've never met. Molly had hugged Harry for a very long time at the door. She'd held him by the shoulders afterward and looked at him and her eyes had been bright and her jaw had been set and she'd said, in a voice that was very controlled and therefore very loud in what it was controlling, "You're here now. That's what matters." Harry had let himself be hugged and had not said anything because there was nothing to say and because the hug itself was sufficient. Arthur Weasley arrived 20 minutes after Molly, coming directly from the ministry, still in his work robes, and shook Harry's hand in a way that communicated both great warmth and great distress that he was managing with the particular British dignity of pretending the distress was just part of his general manner. "Ron and Hermione?" Harry asked him. "We thought," Arthur hesitated. "Molly wanted to wait until after the meeting. Until we know where things stand." Harry nodded. He understood. He found he even agreed, which surprised him a little. Bill Weasley arrived at 2:45, and with him came Kingsley Shacklebolt, who was large and deliberate and had the presence of someone who enters rooms and immediately understands them, and Emmeline Vance, who Harry had never met and who had the careful watchfulness of an experienced spy. Moody arrived at 2:57 with the precise punctuality of a man who arrived early to every location to assess its defenses and was therefore never late. He looked at Harry. His magical eye spun. "Good," he said. "You're here. That's step 1. What's step 2? Harry asked. "Step 2 depends on Dumbledore." His real eye narrowed. "Don't let him make you small. He's very good at that. It's not malicious, it's habit. But don't let him." Harry looked at him for a moment. Mad-Eye Moody, who had been impersonated for a full year without Harry knowing, who had turned out to be in a trunk while a Death Eater used his face, who was currently standing in a hallway looking at Harry with the evaluative intensity of a general assessing a resource. He was giving Harry advice about Dumbledore, which was interesting, given that they were both in the same organization. "I won't," Harry said. Moody grunted approvingly and stumped past him. Dumbledore arrived at 3 o'clock exactly. He came through the front door with McGonagall at his side, and his entrance was the entrance it always was, the long robes, the silver hair, the half-moon glasses, the precise and specific warmth of his attention that had always made Harry feel simultaneously seen and managed. He was carrying his own copy of the scroll, Harry noticed. It was tucked under his arm. He had clearly read it, because there were marks on the parchment, notation in purple ink, which was distinctly Dumbledore's color. He had annotated it. Something moved through Harry at the sight of those purple annotations, not anger, exactly, or not only anger. Something more like clarity. The annotations meant Dumbledore had read it carefully and thought about it strategically, which meant the person in this room who was most responsible for the decisions that had led to what the scroll contained was currently approaching this meeting prepared to manage the situation. Harry decided something. He decided it quietly and completely, the way you decide things when you've been pushed to a point of clarity by accumulated pressure, and what he decided was this: he was not going to make it easy. Not out of spite. Not to punish anyone. Simply because making it easy would be another version of shrinking himself for other people's comfort, and he was done with that. The meeting convened around the long table. There were 13 people. Harry sat between Sirius and Tonks, with Remus across from him. Dumbledore sat at the head of the table. He looked at Harry first. The blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses were, as they always were, very direct and very warm and completely impossible to read past. "Harry," he said. "I'm very glad you're here." "Thank you for coming, Headmaster," Harry said, and his voice came out even and polite, and he watched a very small something move in Dumbledore's expression at the politeness of it, at the formality where there had previously been a degree of deference. "I think we should begin with," Dumbledore started. "Can I say something first?" Harry said. A pause. The kind of pause that contains a decision. Dumbledore nodded. Harry looked at the table, at all of them, all 13 people, including Snape at the far end who was looking at him with an expression Harry couldn't decode, and Molly Weasley who was watching him with her hands clasped and her jaw set, and Moody with his magical eye fixed on the middle distance, always watching everything at once. "I don't know all of you well," Harry said. "Some of you I know very well. Some of you I've just met. But you all got the same scroll this morning, so you all know the same things. And I want to say, before we talk about strategy or blood wards or what comes next, I want to say that I'm not interested in performing gratitude for things that should have been basic. I'm not angry at most of you. I understand there are complications. But I'm 17 in 2 weeks and I'm done pretending that things were fine when they weren't, because the pretending never actually made anything better. It just made it easier for everyone else." The room was very quiet. "So?" Harry looked at Dumbledore. "What would you like to discuss?" Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. The warmth was still there. Harry didn't think it was false, he'd never thought it was false, but something underneath it had moved, recalibrated. He was looking at Harry with an attention that was slightly different from his usual attention, and Harry thought, he didn't expect this. He expected grief, or anger, or gratitude, or some version of Harry that he already knew. He didn't expect this. Good. I think, Dumbledore said slowly, that we should discuss the Blood Ward. With respect, Sirius said, before Harry could speak, the Blood Ward discussion has one relevant point, which is that Harry is not going back, and then it's over. Sirius, McGonagall started. No. Sirius was completely calm. The calmness was the most alarming version of him. I've been a lot of things in my life, Minerva. I've been reckless, I've been stupid, I've been in places where I didn't have choices. Right now I have choices. And my choice is that James and Lily Potter's son does not go back to that house. Not while I am alive and capable of preventing it. The protective magic that Lily's sacrifice created is genuine, Dumbledore said. I want to be clear about that. The protection it provides against Voldemort is offset, Tonks said, by the documented evidence that the placement is itself a source of harm. She had her parchment in front of her, the notes she'd been making since the kitchen, and she was crisp and professional and not aggressive, which was somehow more effective than aggression. From a safeguarding standpoint, Headmaster, this isn't a close call. The diagnostic scroll would be admissible as evidence of neglect and physical abuse under Wizarding Child Protection Codes, Section 14 through 19. Whatever the Blood Ward provides, it doesn't provide protection from the Dursleys. Nobody's suggesting going back, Dumbledore said. Good, Sirius said. Then we agree. I'm suggesting that we think carefully about what protective arrangements will replace the ward, given that Voldemort is going to find him wherever he is, Harry said. He already found me in a graveyard that was supposed to be inaccessible. The Blood Ward didn't stop Wormtail from taking my blood last June. It didn't stop the Dementor attack last summer. Whatever comfort the Blood Ward provided, it was more comfortable for the adults managing the situation than it was protective for me. The table went very still. Snape, at the far end, had not said anything. He was looking at the middle of the table with the specific focused blankness of someone thinking very hard about something they have no intention of sharing. McGonagall said, quietly but with great precision, I owe you an apology, Harry. The room shifted. McGonagall did not apologize in the habit of it, she was not the sort of person who issued apologies easily or often, which meant when she did it was very specifically chosen. She was looking at him across the table with an expression that was, for her, quite exposed. I placed you with the Dursleys on Dumbledore's recommendation and I had reservations, she said. I said so at the time. I was told that the protection was necessary and the family was the best option available and I accepted that. I checked on you during your first year, before you received your letter, and I saw enough to make me uncomfortable, and I let myself be persuaded that it was manageable. She stopped. That was wrong of me. I should have pushed harder. Harry looked at her. He thought about Professor McGonagall, who was the most consistently fair adult in his Hogwarts life, who took points from her own house for broken rules and gave them for genuine achievement, who had handed him a firebolt replacement after his Nimbus was destroyed, who had never once treated him as either special or diminished. He thought about her watching him, at age 1, from outside a house she had reservations about. Thank you, he said. And meant it. This is useful, Moody said gruffly, but let's not make it group therapy. The boy's right, Voldemort is going to look for him. What's the security plan for Grimmauld Place, and what's the contingency if it's compromised? This redirected the room. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had been quiet and attentive throughout, outlined the current Fidelius protections and their limitations with the economy of a man who has already thought through most of the problems before being asked to present them. Bill Weasley talked about additional ward layers. Moody contributed 3 separate objections to each suggestion and then, when pressed, admitted each one was sound. Harry listened. Not passively, he asked questions when he had them, and the questions were specific enough that Moody gave him an approving look and Kingsley answered with the respect you give to questions that are actually useful. It was Snape who finally spoke, 20 minutes in. The Dark Lord will not move immediately, he said. His voice was the same as it was in potions, level, slightly nasal, with a precision that refused to be rushed. He is consolidating. His return is not yet publicly acknowledged and he is using that window to rebuild his network before the Ministry is forced to respond. He will look for Potter, yes, but he will not do so recklessly. He is not the same as he was in the First War. He has learned patience. Everyone looked at him. He will use the Ministry's denial against us, Snape continued. If Potter is seen publicly operating outside Dumbledore's management, he looked at Harry briefly, and Harry looked back without expression, it will be used to discredit both of them. The goal, from the Dark Lord's perspective, is not simply to kill Potter. It is to isolate him. To make him appear unstable, ungovernable, unworthy of the public's faith. So the information war matters as much as the physical security, Tonks said. More, Snape said. At this stage. How do you know this? Sirius asked. There was nothing in his voice except the question. Snape looked at him. You know how I know it. A pause. Sirius looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore said nothing. He's still going in, Harry said. Not a question. Severus's work is, Dumbledore started. I'm not objecting, Harry said. I'm making sure I understand the situation. He's still in Voldemort's circle, he's providing intelligence, and that's why he knew what Voldemort's current strategy is. He looked at Snape. Is he suspicious of you? Snape's expression did something subtle. The Dark Lord is suspicious of everyone. That is his nature. I manage it. How? By being useful, Snape said. And by being consistent. Harry considered him. He looked at Snape the way he'd learned to look at things this morning, with the clear-eyed attention that came from having given up on pretending things were comfortable when they weren't. The reason you don't like me, Harry said. Is it actually about my father, or is it about something that's harder to explain? The table went very still in a different way. Snape's expression did not change. But something behind it moved. That, he said after a moment, is not a conversation for this meeting. No, Harry agreed. But I want to have it at some point. Snape looked at him for 3 full seconds, which was a long time in that room, with those eyes, and then looked away. Dumbledore cleared his throat. Perhaps we should, I have a question for you, Harry said. Turning to look at Dumbledore fully. Directly. And I'd like a direct answer. Dumbledore held his gaze. Of course. Did you know? Harry said. Not the specifics, I don't think you had the diagnostic scroll. But did you know that the Dursleys weren't, that it wasn't, he stopped. Found the word he needed, which was specific enough to mean what he needed it to mean. Did you know it was wrong? The room held its breath. Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the silence was itself an answer, but he gave a spoken one. I knew that it was imperfect, he said. I knew that Petunia Dursley was not a warm woman and that Vernon Dursley was not a kind man. I knew that the environment would be difficult. I told myself that the magical protection outweighed the personal cost. He paused. I was wrong to make that calculation. And I was wrong to continue making it for 10 years without investigating whether my assumption about the balance was still correct, or had ever been correct. Harry watched him. He was listening for the thing under the words, the thing Dumbledore always had under the words, the larger strategy that everything else was organized around. He could hear it, faintly. The admission was genuine, he thought. It was also organized. Even in apology, Dumbledore was managing something. Thank you, Harry said, the same way he'd said it to McGonagall, specific and deliberate. That's honest. It is insufficiently honest, Dumbledore said, which surprised Harry slightly. But it is honest. I intend to be more so. He looked around the table. What Harry needs now is stability, security, and support. The Order's primary task this summer, after security itself, is to provide those 3 things without making demands that serve our agenda rather than his well-being. I would like us to hold ourselves to that. It was, Harry thought, a very good speech. It was also, he thought, partially a performance of accountability rather than purely the thing itself. But that was the nature of Dumbledore. Even when he was being genuine, he was also managing the room. That wasn't necessarily sinister. It was just what he was. Harry could work with it if he kept his eyes open. "All right," Harry said. "Then I have a proposal." Everyone looked at him. "I want to be part of the planning. Not as the objective, as a participant. I know things about Voldemort that are useful. I know how he thinks because I've been in his head, literally. I know what he fears, what he wants, what his priorities are. I'm not a child and I'm not a chess piece and I'm done being managed from outside. That doesn't mean I'll be reckless or uncooperative. It means I want a seat at the table and I want my input treated as actual input and not as something to be diplomatically acknowledged and then ignored." Moody made a sound. It might have been approval. "You're 16, McGonagall said, but she said it like she was testing the argument rather than making it. "I was 16 when I faced Voldemort in a graveyard," Harry said. "I was 15 when I fought a basilisk. I was 14 when I held off 100 Dementors. I'm not arguing about my age. I'm arguing about what I've demonstrated." McGonagall was quiet. "I think that's reasonable," Tonks said. "Just simply." Into the silence. "As do I," Kingsley said. Remus looked at Dumbledore. Something passed between them that Harry couldn't fully read. "Then it's agreed," Dumbledore said. And to his credit, he said it without visible qualification, which was either genuine acceptance or very good management. Either way, it was what Harry needed. Outside, the summer afternoon had moved past its peak. The thin light of 4 o'clock was coming through the high basement windows at an angle, landing in pale rectangles on the stone floor. Somewhere above them the house made its old sounds, the pipes, the settling of old wood, the portraits that apparently muttered to themselves in the upper corridors. The meeting broke up in pieces, some people leaving through the front door, some staying, Molly heading back to the kitchen to start on something for dinner, Moody going upstairs to check the ward perimeters with the systematic thoroughness of someone who does not trust magic to function without verification. Bill caught Harry's eye as he was leaving and said, "Ron's going to lose his mind when he hears about today," which was the most comforting thing anyone had said to Harry in weeks. Harry was the last one at the table, nearly. Just him and Sirius, and the rectangular slants of evening light, and the particular quiet of a house that had just processed something significant. "Well," Sirius said. "Yeah," Harry said. Sirius reached across the table and briefly, without making a large thing of it, put his hand on Harry's wrist. Harry looked down at it. Sirius's hand was lean and scarred from years of things that had gone wrong, and it was on Harry's arm with the specific weight of something that intended to stay. "This house is full of things I hate," Sirius said. "My family's whole legacy, or whatever you'd call it. I hate being here. I want you to know that so you understand I'm not staying because I want to. I'm staying because you're here." Harry looked at the room, the low ceiling, the stone floor, the wrong and depressing portrait choices on the walls, the old table that had absorbed too many arguments. "We can redecorate," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Something cracked in his expression and became a smile, and it was the most alive Harry had seen his face. "Yeah," Sirius said. "We can do that." Dobby appeared at Harry's elbow. He was carrying a bowl of soup that smelled extraordinary. "Harry Potter will eat this," he said, placing it with ceremony on the table in front of Harry. "It is the first of 6 nutritional restoration meals that Dobby has planned. It is also very good soup." Harry looked at the soup. It was, somehow, the exact right color of soup to look at after a day like this one, deep and golden and real. He picked up the spoon. "Thank you, Dobby," he said. Dobby stood very straight, his ears perfectly level. "Harry Potter is welcome," he said. Outside, the summer evening was settling into dusk over London, and the gas lamps of Grimmauld Place were coming on one by one, and the old house sat in its row of old houses containing something it had not contained before, a beginning. Chapter 3, What Stays. Harry slept for 11 hours. He didn't mean to. He'd taken half the dreamless sleep potion, half, because Tonks had left the vial on his nightstand with a note that said whole vial is fine but start with half if you want to be cautious, your call, and he'd appreciated the option, and he'd lain down on the bed in the south-facing room at 9:30, meaning to think, and instead the sleep had come up and taken him like a tide coming in, smooth and total and without any of the usual resistance. He woke at 8:30 the next morning to grey London light coming through the curtains and Hedwig sitting on the headboard looking at him with the composed patience of an owl who has been waiting for some time and is too dignified to say so. "Morning," he said. She made a soft sound. He reached up and ran his knuckle along her breast feathers and she pressed into it, which was her version of saying she was glad he was there, which was her version of a lot of things she couldn't otherwise express. He lay still for a moment, taking inventory. The ribs, properly set now, Healer Marsh's work, felt different. Not absent, but different, a clean ache rather than the grinding wrongness that had been there for 2 months. The sleep had done something to the inside of his head too, scraped it clean of the gritty, buzzing static that had been there for 33 days, so that the morning felt like a morning rather than a continuation of an unbroken exhausted dark. He thought about the meeting. About Dumbledore's annotated scroll. About McGonagall's apology and the specific weight of it. She'd chosen every word like she was placing stones in a wall, deliberately and precisely. About Snape, who had not apologized and had not pretended to and had instead said something genuinely useful about Voldemort's current strategy, which was more honest in its way than an apology would have been. About Sirius's hand on his wrist. About Molly Weasley's soup, which Dobby had been visibly, professionally offended by, in the way of 2 artists with adjacent but distinct visions. He got up. The house was different in the morning. Not better, exactly, but different, less like something that was built to contain unhappiness and more like something that had simply been empty for a long time and was figuring out what to do with occupants. The pipes clanged when he turned on the shower in the second-floor bathroom. The floorboards in the hallway made sounds that were more conversational than threatening. A portrait near the stairs, a thin, imperious woman in black who was presumably a black, opened her eyes when he passed and drew breath to say something, and he looked at her and said, conversationally, "Don't," and she closed her mouth and looked affronted and stayed that way. The kitchen was already occupied. Remus was at the table with tea and a book that he wasn't reading. He was holding it the way people hold something when they need their hands to be doing something other than nothing. He looked up when Harry came in. "Morning," Remus said. "Sleep?" 11 hours. Something visible moved through Remus's face. "Good." Dobby materialized from beside the range before Harry had fully crossed the room. Breakfast arrived on the table with the organized efficiency of a military operation: eggs, toast, something that smelled like properly cooked bacon, a glass of orange juice, and a small potion vial that Harry recognized as the first nutritional restoration dose. "Dobby has made a schedule," the elf said. "Harry Potter will find it on the side of his plate." There was indeed a small, tightly rolled piece of parchment. Harry unrolled it. It was written in Dobby's careful, looping hand and listed every meal for the next 6 weeks, with nutritional notes beside each one, with alternatives marked with asterisks, with a small legend in the margin explaining the asterisk system. Harry looked at it for a moment. "Dobby. This is extraordinarily detailed." "Yes," Dobby said. "Did you write this last night?" "Dobby wrote the first version 2 weeks ago," Dobby said. "Dobby has refined it." Harry looked at the schedule, the care in it, the thought, the evidence of 2 weeks of a small elf sitting somewhere working out what Harry needed to eat over 6 weeks and in what order and with what variations to keep it from being tedious, and he felt something that was large enough to need a moment to sit with. "Thank you, Dobby," he said, the third time he'd said it in less than 24 hours, and each time it felt more inadequate and more necessary. "Eat the eggs," Dobby said. "They'll get cold." Harry ate the eggs. Remus put his book down properly and picked up his tea and said, "I've been thinking about what you said in the meeting." About being a participant rather than an objective. And I think you're right, Remus said. I also think, and I want to be honest about this, that some of us are going to struggle with the adjustment. Not because we disagree with it in principle. Because we've spent 4 years thinking about your safety in a particular framework, and frameworks are hard to revise even when you know they need revising. Harry looked at him. You're telling me to be patient with the process. I'm acknowledging the process exists, Remus said carefully. I'm not asking you to make it easier for us. I'm just naming it. Harry considered this. He thought about the difference between being asked to shrink himself and being told that the people around him were working on expanding their capacity, and whether those were the same thing or different things, and decided they were different things. Okay, he said. I can work with that. Remus nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more but was making a decision not to crowd it. He picked up his not-reading book again. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen doing its kitchen sounds, Dobby cleaning things that were probably already clean with the focused purpose of someone whose peace of mind is expressed through productive activity. Harry was halfway through the bacon when the door opened and Tonks came in sideways, because she was carrying a large cardboard box that blocked her forward view, and immediately walked into the doorframe. I'm fine, she said, before anyone said anything. We didn't say anything, Harry said. I could feel the concern. She maneuvered the box onto the table, displacing Remus's book by approximately 6 inches. Morning. Sleep. 11 hours. Excellent. She began unpacking the box. I got things. The things were, a set of wizarding wireless components, an assortment of books that were not school textbooks, 2 different Muggle board games, a large bag of Honeyduke's chocolates, a box of Muggle playing cards, and, from the very bottom, carefully wrapped in brown paper, a photograph in a frame. She held this last one out to Harry. He took it. Unwrapped it. It was a photograph from the magical world. It moved, slightly, in the gentle way of photographs that have been set to idle rather than active loop. It showed a group of young people Harry had never seen gathered together, laughing, on what looked like a summer afternoon somewhere. He recognized Remus immediately, younger, with more hair and less gray in it, but unmistakably him. He recognized Sirius, young, grinning, his whole face open in a way that the Sirius of now showed only in flashes. He recognized his mother, and his breath snagged on it, because he always recognized her without warning, and the recognition was always the same, the green eyes that were his, the way she was laughing, the fullness of being alive in every line of her. And his father, next to her, with his hair exactly as described and his glasses exactly as Harry knew them from every mirror he'd ever looked at. Where did you get this? Harry asked. Remus had it, Tonks said. She was carefully not looking at his face, and he appreciated that too, that specific gift of space. He looked at Remus. I thought, Remus stopped. Started again. I have several. I thought you should have one here. This one is from the summer of '78, before everything got heavier. It was a good summer. Harry looked at the photograph. His father threw his arm around his mother's shoulders and she leaned into it with the ease of something practiced and beloved, and Sirius said something that made everyone around him laugh, and Remus in the photograph tilted his head back and laughed too, and they were all impossibly, terribly young. Thank you, Harry said. That word was getting used a lot today, and it kept meaning a different thing each time. He propped the photograph against the orange juice glass and ate the rest of his breakfast with it in his eye line. Sirius came downstairs at 10, which was apparently his natural schedule, and immediately began making coffee with the intensity of someone practicing an art form. He had a specific relationship with mornings that seemed to involve treating them as a personal affront until sufficient caffeine had been deployed. Harry filed this away as useful information. What are we doing today? Harry asked, when Sirius appeared to have reached functional capacity. Today, Sirius said, I want to show you the house. Not the, he waved a hand at the general oppressiveness of the architecture, not the family history part of it. The useful parts. The useful parts turned out to be considerable. There was a room on the 3rd floor, behind a door that required a specific wand movement to open, which Sirius showed Harry once and trusted him to remember, and he did. That was clearly where the Sirius order work happened. Maps on the walls. Pins and connections. A board with names that Harry recognized and names he didn't. A stack of reports going back months, the paper a pale blue that he recognized as Ministry Standard. Sirius stood in the doorway of this room with his coffee and looked at it. Kingsley updates this twice a week. Moody adds to it when he has something from his contacts. I update the Voldemort-adjacent sections when I have intel from, he paused, sources. Sources, Harry said. People who were in the First War who stayed in contact through everything. He looked at Harry. You can read everything in here. All of it. I'm not going to, thank you, Harry said. Sirius nodded. He pushed off the doorframe and moved into the room and Harry followed, and they spent an hour going through the current state of the board, Sirius explaining what he knew with the economy of someone who had been a field operative before he was a fugitive and hadn't lost the habit of clear briefing. Harry asked questions. Sirius answered them straight, and when he didn't know something he said so, which Harry appreciated so much he didn't say anything about it because saying it would have made it awkward. The thing that struck Harry most, looking at the board, was the shape of Voldemort's current activity. Snape had said it the day before, consolidating, patient, using the Ministry's denial as cover. But looking at the actual pins on the map, the pattern was visible in a way that hearing it described hadn't conveyed. The Ministry's denial wasn't just a gift of time to Voldemort. It was a structural vulnerability. The Order was operating under social conditions in which the central threat couldn't be publicly named, and everything they did had to be conducted in that context. He'll move on the Ministry, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Eventually, yes. Not eventually. Soon. Harry was looking at the pattern, the cluster of activity around specific Ministry departments, the connections to names he recognized as political figures, the subtle undermining of credibility that Snape had identified as the current strategy. He doesn't need to storm the Ministry. He just needs enough people inside it. Then the denial stops being about convincing anyone and starts being about forcing everyone to play along. Sirius was very still. When did you start thinking like this? Harry looked at the board. I think I've been thinking like this for a while. I just didn't have anywhere to put it. Downstairs, a door opened and closed. Voices, at least 3 of them, one of them Tonks, one of them Remus, one of them unfamiliar. Harry glanced at the door to the map room. Order people, he said. Probably Hestia and Kingsley. They're here most days. Sirius looked at him. You want to go down? In a minute. Harry looked at the map one more time. He found the pin labeled Privet Drive and looked at it for a moment, the physical smallness of it, a single pin in a map full of pins, and yet its particular weight in the larger picture. He reached out and unpinned it. Sirius watched him. Harry held the pin for a moment, then placed it on the table beside the map. Just put it down. No dramatic thing about it. Okay, he said. Let's go down. Kingsley Shacklebolt was in the kitchen with Tonks, discussing something in the low, compact way of people accustomed to briefing in occupied space, efficient, the important things first, everything else stripped out. Hestia Jones was not there, which meant it had been a different third voice. Remus was back at the table with tea that was probably his 3rd cup. Kingsley looked up when Harry came in. Good morning. He said it with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. Kingsley had a presence that was mostly made of stillness, and the stillness made the attention feel total. Morning, Harry said. What's the briefing? Kingsley glanced at Tonks. Something passed between them, some professional calibration. Ministry is moving, Kingsley said. Fudge is escalating the public narrative about Dumbledore. There's going to be some kind of education oversight committee appointed, basically an attempt to get someone inside Hogwarts who answers to the Ministry rather than Dumbledore. Harry thought about Snape's observation from the day before. The goal is to isolate. He's going after Dumbledore first, Harry said. Before coming after me directly. Because Dumbledore is the main credibility structure supporting the idea that Voldemort is back. Kingsley looked at him with the attention recalibrating slightly. That's the current analysis, yes. So the ministry appointee at Hogwarts will be someone who actively, Harry stopped. A specific dread settled in his stomach. It'll be someone who'll undermine the defense curriculum. Make sure students aren't actually prepared. That's speculation, Kingsley said, carefully. It's the logical extension of the strategy, Harry said. If you can't win the information war from the outside, you go after the infrastructure that's training the next generation to recognize and resist you. That's not a new idea. That's just what you do. The kitchen was quiet. He's right, Tonks said. I know he's right, Kingsley said. I'm noting that it's a worst-case extrapolation. The last 4 years have been worst-case extrapolations, one after another, Harry said. I'd rather prepare for the version that turns out to be right. Kingsley smiled, briefly and completely. Agreed. He looked at Remus. We should bring this to Dumbledore. Dumbledore probably already knows, Remus said. Probably, Kingsley said. But Harry should be in the room when we discuss it. That was the agreement. Harry registered the deliberate way Kingsley had said it. The agreement, not a favor, not a concession. An agreement. He'd been in the meeting, he'd heard Harry's proposal, and he was already treating it as operational fact. Something about that was more stabilizing than almost anything else that had happened in the last day. The afternoon got complicated at 2:30. Sirius was teaching Harry a version of the expansion charm used in field work, how to increase the effective space of a room without changing its external dimensions, useful for safe houses, when someone knocked at the front door with 4 specific knocks that meant order member. Sirius went to the door and came back looking like he'd bitten into something he hadn't expected. Snape, he said. Harry put his wand down. Is that unexpected? He usually uses the back way. Sirius's jaw was tight. He comes here to report to Dumbledore. He doesn't, he stopped himself. He's not here to see me. Is he here to see me? A pause. Probably, Sirius said. He said it like each letter cost him something. Then I should go and, Harry. Sirius looked at him. I need you to know that whatever Snape says to you about your father, whatever version of events he presents, he's not a reliable narrator on the subject of James Potter. I know that, Harry said. He was cruel to James in ways that, Sirius. Harry picked his wand back up. I know. I've seen it, remember? The pensive. He looked at Sirius steadily. But that's not the conversation I want to have with him. And whatever James did, it doesn't change what the scroll says or what this summer was. Those are separate things. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression, the specific pain of someone who loves a person enough to want to protect them from things the person has already processed. Right, he said. Okay. Harry went downstairs. Snape was in the hallway, not in the kitchen. He declined to proceed further, apparently, which Harry thought said something about the dynamic of the house that was worth noting. He was in his black robes and his usual expression, which was the expression of a man who has achieved a comprehensive settlement with his own discomfort and therefore doesn't need to perform ease. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. You wanted to talk, Harry said. I had something to tell you, Snape said. It could wait for a formal meeting, but I thought, he stopped. Made a decision Harry couldn't see. Formal meetings have an audience. This doesn't require one. Harry nodded. He led Snape to the small sitting room off the hallway, the one that didn't have anything too disturbing on the walls, just a series of portraits of long-dead blacks who were all asleep at this hour, probably because they kept aristocratic hours. He sat. Snape did not sit. I read the diagnostic scroll, Snape said. Everyone read the diagnostic scroll. I read it differently from most people, Snape said. He was looking at the fireplace, not at Harry. I know what injuries from a narrow implement look like. I know the specific pattern of them. He paused. I want to be clear that this information is not something I intend to use as currency. I'm not telling you this to create an obligation or to suggest that it makes us similar. I'm telling you because it seemed like something you should know. Harry was very still. Snape finally looked at him. I was not kind to you, he said. I attributed to you qualities that belonged to your father, which was unjust to you regardless of my feelings about him. I am not apologizing for my feelings about your father, that's a separate matter. But you were not your father and I treated you as though you were, and the combination of that and, he glanced at the scroll in his memory, or seemed to, other things, created a situation in your school years that I could have made easier and didn't. Harry sat with this for a moment. He thought about 4 years of potions. He thought about the shrieking shack, about the pensive, about the look on Snape's face every time Harry walked into his classroom, the specific form of dislike that had always felt too practiced to be entirely real. Why are you telling me this now? Harry asked. Because the situation has changed, Snape said. What the scroll revealed changes the context. It changes what my behavior toward you meant in that context, regardless of my intentions. You're saying you would have been different if you'd known. I'm saying I should have looked, Snape said. The signs were there. I chose not to see them. He said it flatly, without self-pity or performance. Just the fact, which was somehow the most difficult possible way to say it. Harry looked at him. He thought about what he'd said to Sirius, those are separate things. The harm at Privet Drive and the harm in potions were separate things with the same texture, being made small, being made wrong, being told in 100 small ways that your existence was inconvenient. But they came from different places and they required different responses. I appreciate you telling me, Harry said. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just acknowledgement, which was what Snape had offered and what he deserved in return. The thing I want from you going forward is the intelligence. The Voldemort intelligence. I want it straight and I want it when it's relevant, not filtered through 5 other people first. Snape studied him. Something in the expression adjusted, a slight recalibration of whatever model he had of Harry, which seemed to be undergoing considerable revision. I can do that, Snape said. Then we're fine, Harry said. He meant it. Not warmly, not coldly. Just as a statement of operative reality, they could work together, they would work together, the past was not resolved but it was categorized. Harry had put it somewhere he could access it clearly without it running loose through everything else. Snape looked at him for a moment longer with an expression Harry couldn't fully name. Then he said, the Occlumency sessions Dumbledore suggested last year. What about them? I would suggest returning to them. Not in the form we previously attempted, those were badly structured by both of us. But the principle is sound. If the Dark Lord is in your mind, he's not. Not now. Harry tapped his scar. Since the graveyard it's been, quieter. But inconsistent. It comes and goes. That inconsistency is itself the danger, Snape said. When the connection is quiet you're unaware of it. When it opens you're unprepared. Teach me to prepare, Harry said. I intend to. Snape picked up his cloak from the chair where he'd placed it. I'll send word about scheduling. He left. Not abruptly, just efficiently, the way he moved through most things, the way someone moves when they've done what they came to do. Harry sat in the small sitting room for a moment after he left, in the quiet. One of the portraits, an elderly black who had apparently only been dozing, opened one eye and looked at him. Interesting, the portrait said. Go back to sleep, Harry said pleasantly. The portrait did. Tonks found him on the roof. There was a hatch at the top of the house, accessible from a ladder in the upstairs corridor, that opened onto a flat area of lead-flashed roof behind the chimneys where you could sit and not be visible from the street. Harry had found it by accident, following the ladder because it was there, and had been sitting for an hour watching the London skyline do its London skyline things in the late afternoon light, the smudged distances, the specific density of it, the way the Muggle city looked completely indifferent to the existence of Grimmauld Place below it. He heard the hatch, and then Tonks's voice saying, "Ow," quietly, and then she hauled herself up and sat beside him against the largest chimney stack with the casual manner of someone who has found a good spot and is claiming it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did he. They watched a pigeon navigate something complicated about 3 rooftops over. "Heard Snape came," she said eventually. "Yeah. How was that?" Harry thought about how to answer. "Better than expected," he said. "He said some things I didn't expect him to say." "Snape says unexpected things sometimes," Tonks said. "Mostly in the direction of unhelpful, but occasionally in the other direction." She looked sideways at him. "How are you actually doing? You keep asking me that. You keep giving short answers." "So?" Harry looked at the skyline. He thought about how to be accurate, not performed, not abbreviated. Actually accurate. "I feel like something I was carrying for a long time got taken out and examined and now it's sitting on a table where everyone can see it," he said. "And there's something relieving about that. But there's also," he paused. "I spent a long time getting good at not needing things. And now I'm in a house where people are trying to give me things I need, and the part of me that got good at not needing them doesn't entirely trust it yet." Tonks was quiet, taking that in without rushing to respond. "That makes sense," she said. "Not that'll get better or give it time. Just, that makes sense." Which was the right thing? "The other thing," Harry said, and he didn't know he was going to say this until it was coming out, "is that I keep thinking about the 5th year. About going back to Hogwarts. Because if what Kingsley said is right, if the Ministry puts someone in there, it'll be ugly," Tonks said. "No softening." "Yeah." He looked at his hands. "And I keep thinking about everyone else in that school who doesn't know what they're walking back into. Ron and Hermione and," he stopped. "They didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did you." "No," Harry said. "But it's my thing. It's attached to me. People who stand near me, Harry." Tonks shifted to look at him directly. "If you're about to say something about people being safer away from you, I'm going to throw you off this roof." He looked at her. "Not literally," she said. "There's a cushioning charm on the yard, probably." She was entirely deadpan. "The point is, your friends aren't near you because they don't understand the risk. They're near you because they've assessed the risk and decided you're worth it. That's not your burden to carry. That's their choice." Harry was quiet for a moment. "You're very good at this," he said. "At what?" "At saying the thing that needs saying without it becoming a lecture." She grinned. It was a quick, sharp grin that changed her face completely, the kind of grin that suggested she found the world genuinely funny even when it was difficult. "I've had practice. My mum's a black, is. It's complicated. The point is I grew up in a house where everyone was very committed to saying only the things that served their position, and the alternative seemed more interesting." Harry thought about that. About growing up in a house where what you said was always calculated, where the domestic politics of the space required constant navigation, where nothing was quite what it appeared. It was different from his situation, but not entirely. "The hair thing," he said. "How does that work? Do you choose it or does it just happen?" She blinked at the subject change, then seemed to decide it was fine. "Both," she said. "I can control it consciously, but when I'm not thinking about it tends to reflect what I'm feeling. Right now," she glanced down at her hair, which was currently a sort of medium brown, not any particular color, "I'm thinking about 6 different things at once, which apparently translates to beige. What's the most alarming color it's gone? Once went full orange when I was angry. Not nice orange, construction cone orange. In a ministry briefing. She considered. That was a memorable day. Harry laughed. It came out before he'd decided to laugh, which was the best kind, the kind that sneaks past whatever is guarding the door. Tonks smiled at him, not the grin this time but something quieter. For what it's worth, she said, from someone who's watched you for the last 24 hours, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more, she considered her words. Collapsed. The scroll it's a hard document to read, Harry. Most people who've lived what that document describes are in more pieces when they come out the other side. The fact that you're not, maybe I am, Harry said. Maybe I'm just good at presenting intact. Maybe, she said. But I don't think so. She looked at the skyline. I think you're actually this together. Which is either a remarkable thing about you personally or says something about what you've had to build over the years that's worth keeping even now that the reason for building it is gone. Harry thought about that for a long time. About what he'd built, not the defense mechanisms, not the practice performance of I'm fine, but the actual things. The capacity to keep moving when staying still wasn't safe. The ability to assess a situation without panicking. The habit of noticing what other people needed because if he was useful he was less invisible. All the things built in a small room and a smaller cupboard that were genuinely his. I think it's both, he said. Yeah, Tonks said. Probably. A crow landed on the chimney above them and looked at both of them with the evaluative contempt that crows directed at most things, and then flew off. Dinner was large and loud. Molly had come back with Arthur, and Bill had stayed, and Kingsley had been convinced to remain by some combination of the smell from the kitchen and the social force of Molly Weasley's hospitality, which operated roughly like gravity in that it was difficult to move away from once you were within its radius. Even Remus had lost the slightly held quality he'd had all day and was telling a story about a thing that had gone badly wrong in 1981 that was apparently now funny. Harry sat in the middle of it and ate things Dobby and Molly had produced in a complex culinary negotiation that seemed to involve a lot of respectful circling around each other's techniques. The food was exceptional. His third nutritional restoration meal of the day had arrived at the table in the form of something Dobby had folded into the bread course without telling anyone. That's very clever, Healer Marsh had said, when Harry told her about Dobby's schedule during her check-in earlier. She'd come back to see how the first day had gone and had looked at the meal plan with professional respect. He's been planning it for 2 weeks, Harry had said. She'd looked at him over her reading glasses. He loves you very much, doesn't he? Yeah, Harry had said. He does. Dobby, across the kitchen, had pretended not to hear this. At the table now, Sirius was in the seat across from Harry, and the Sirius of dinner was different from the Sirius of the morning briefing room, freer, larger, the version of him that came out when there were enough people around that the house felt less like itself. He was in the middle of something that was making Kingsley genuinely laugh, which seemed to require real effort, given Kingsley's general economy of expression. Arthur caught Harry's eye across the table and said, quietly, Ron sent a note. Harry's attention sharpened. What did it say? He said, and I'm quoting directly, tell Harry if he's all right to tell me, and if he's not tell him anyway. Arthur smiled. That's Ron. Harry smiled back. That's Ron. Hermione wrote too. Hers was longer. Arthur produced a folded piece of parchment from his pocket. She said you should have it directly. Harry took it. Hermione's handwriting was immediately recognizable, dense and precise and angled slightly forward, like it was trying to get somewhere. He didn't read it at the table, just put it in his pocket, because some things were for later, for quiet. When can I see them? Harry asked. Arthur glanced toward Molly, who was talking to Remus and apparently not listening, but was definitely listening. Soon, he said. Molly wants to, she wants everything to be set up properly, Harry said. She worries, Arthur said simply. It's her version of love. It can be a lot. I know, Harry said. And he did know, and he didn't mind it. Molly Weasley's version of love was large and occasionally suffocating and completely unconditional, and the unconditional part was what made it possible to absorb the large and occasionally suffocating part. After dinner, when the table was being cleared and Dobby was engaged in a quiet post-service debrief with himself about the quality of the dessert course, Harry went to the small sitting room with Hermione's letter. He unfolded it. It said, "Harry, I know something happened and I know it involves the summer and I know you're probably dealing with a lot right now. I need you to know, and I'm going to say this plainly because you know I do that, I need you to know that whatever the actual situation is, it doesn't change anything from my end. I've been thinking about saying this for 4 years, actually, not this specifically but the general thing it's part of, you don't have to earn your place with me. You never did. I just don't think you knew that and I should have been clearer earlier." Harry sat with the letter for a long time. He thought about 4 years of Hermione standing beside him in whatever direction he went, including directions that were objectively inadvisable. He thought about the specific quality of her loyalty, which was not blind, she disagreed with him frequently and loudly and was usually right, but which was also not contingent. It was the loyalty of someone who had decided something about him very early and had gathered evidence for it ever since, rather than against it. He folded the letter carefully. Put it in his pocket with the intention to keep it. He sat for a while in the small sitting room while the house settled around him, the sounds of the evening kitchen drifting up from below, the portraits sleeping their aristocratic sleep above him on the walls. He thought about everything the day had held. He thought about the map room and the pattern of Voldemort's activity, and about Snape's flat-voiced admission, and about Tonks on the roof saying that's their choice, and about Hermione's letter, and about the photograph of his parents laughing in the summer of 1978, propped against an orange juice glass in a basement kitchen. He pulled out his wand. Lit the lamp in the corner with it, casting the room in warm yellow light. He was not fixed. He knew he was not fixed. Fixing was not a thing that happened in 48 hours after 11 years, and he was too honest with himself to pretend otherwise. But he was here, and he was thinking clearly, and the things that had been pressing down were still there but they were outside him now, on a table where they could be looked at, in the open where they could be dealt with. That was a start. Dobby appeared in the doorway. He was carrying a small cup of tea and wearing an expression of professional concern that was also, unmistakably, something warmer. "Harry Potter is still awake," Dobby said. "Harry Potter is thinking," Harry said. "Dobby has brought thinking tea," Dobby said, and placed it on the table beside him with the ceremony of someone presenting something important. Harry picked it up. The warmth of it went through his hands, down into him. "Dobby," he said. "Sit down for a minute." Dobby looked extremely startled. House elves did not, traditionally, sit in the presence of wizards. Everything in his body language said this was outside protocol. "Please," Harry said. Dobby sat, carefully, on the edge of the opposite chair, his ears very still, his great eyes very serious. "I want to talk about what you did," Harry said. "Not to tell you off. I want to understand why you chose this moment. Why now and not," he thought about it, "last year, or the year before." Dobby was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Last year Harry Potter was in the tournament," he said. "Harry Potter was surviving. The year before," he tilted his head, "Dobby was watching. Always watching. But last year, after what happened," his voice went careful, precise, the way Dobby spoke when he was saying something that mattered, "after the graveyard, Harry Potter came back with something different in him. Not worse. Different. Like something that had been deciding was finally decided." Dobby could see it, even in the first days at Privet Drive. He paused. And Dobby decided that if Harry Potter was finally done pretending, then perhaps the people around Harry Potter should also stop pretending. Harry looked at him. "The scroll was the truth," Dobby said simply. "And the truth was important enough to send." Harry nodded slowly. He thought about what Dobby had said, the year after the graveyard, Harry Potter had something decided. He turned that over. "Do you know what was decided?" he asked. Dobby looked at him with those enormous eyes that didn't miss things. Yes, Dobby said. Dobby thinks Harry Potter decided to still be here. The lamp flickered once in a draft from somewhere. The house settled. Outside, the night had fully arrived over London, and the street below was quiet. Harry wrapped both hands around the teacup. Felt the warmth. Yeah, he said. That's about right. Chapter 4, What Dumbledore Owes. Dumbledore arrived on Thursday morning without warning, which Harry suspected was deliberate. Not maliciously deliberate, just the habit of a man who had been operating at the center of things for so long that the idea of announcing himself felt like a courtesy he'd stopped needing to perform. He came through the front door at 9:30, when Harry was in the map room with Tonks going through the Ministry intelligence that Kingsley had updated overnight, and the first Harry knew of it was Sirius's voice from downstairs carrying a quality that was controlled in the specific way of something being controlled very hard. Harry looked at Tonks. Go, she said, already rolling up the parchment. He went downstairs. Dumbledore was in the hallway, and Sirius was in the doorway of the kitchen, and the space between them had the charged quality of two weather systems that hadn't yet decided what kind of event they were going to produce together. Remus was slightly behind Sirius with the expression of someone ready to do something and not yet sure what. Dumbledore looked at Harry coming down the stairs and something in him settled, the specific settling of a person whose primary concern has been located. Harry, he said. You look better. I slept, Harry said. He came the rest of the way down the stairs and stood in the hallway, not between them but not removed from it either. Do you want to come through to the kitchen? A slight pause. Sirius said nothing, which was the most effortful thing he'd done in a while. I think, Dumbledore said, that a conversation between the two of us might be more productive to begin with. Or, Harry said, a conversation with whoever needs to be in it. Sirius and Remus, at minimum. Dumbledore considered this. He had his wand in hand, not raised, just carried, the absent habit of a very old and very powerful wizard who kept it like a pensioner kept a walking stick, more presence than necessity. Of course, he said. And meant it, Harry thought, as much as Dumbledore meant things that cost him something. They went to the kitchen. Dobby produced tea with a speed that suggested he'd been monitoring the situation and had the kettle ready. Nobody commented on this. Sirius sat at the far end of the table from Dumbledore with the careful distance of someone who has given themselves a physical margin specifically to avoid closing it suddenly. Remus sat between them. Harry sat across from Dumbledore directly, which was where he intended to be for this conversation. Dumbledore looked around the kitchen, taking it in, Harry thought, the way he took most things in, as information. His eyes went briefly to the photograph on the shelf that Remus had given Harry, now propped beside the range, and something moved through his expression that was too fast to read. I want to talk about the prophecy, Harry said. The room went still. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were very steady. How do you know about the prophecy? I don't know much, Harry said. I know one exists. Bode tried to retrieve something from the Department of Mysteries earlier this year, we know that from the Order reports. I know it's connected to me and Voldemort because that's the only thing in the Department of Mysteries that would be worth the effort. And I know you've known about it since before I was born, because if you hadn't, your decision to place me with the Dursleys makes even less sense than it already does. The silence stretched. Remus was looking at the table. Sirius was looking at Dumbledore with the grey-eyed focus of a man who is collecting information he intends to act on. I had planned, Dumbledore said, to tell you. At the right time. When is the right time? When you were ready. I'm ready, Harry said. I've been ready. The criterion you're actually using is not whether I'm ready, it's whether knowing serves your current plan. And I'm asking you to change the criterion. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He set his teacup down. He looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. Dumbledore's full attention was like standing in direct sunlight, warm and total and slightly difficult to look back at without squinting. You've grown, he said. 2 days ago I found out I've been malnourished for most of my life, Harry said. I don't think I've grown. I think I've stopped performing smallness. There's a difference. Something passed through Dumbledore's expression that was complex enough that Harry couldn't fully parse it. It had grief in it, and something like admiration, and underneath both of those something much older and heavier that Harry didn't have a name for yet. The prophecy, Dumbledore said, concerns a child born at the end of July to parents who have thrice defied Voldemort. A child marked by him as his equal. It states that neither can live while the other survives. Harry held very still. He heard it. He let it settle. He thought about what it would have felt like to hear this at 11, at 12, at 13, the versions of himself that had been managing the information about his life in small pieces because the full picture was too much. He thought about what it felt like now, at the end of the summer when he was almost 17, in a kitchen in London, after a graveyard and a tournament and 33 days of lying on a thin mattress not sleeping. It felt like confirmation. Like the shape of something he'd already known from the inside, finally given its external form. Neither can live while the other survives, he said. Yes. So it's him or me. In the prophecy's terms, in any terms, Harry said. That's what it means. That's what it's always been pointing at. And you've known that since I was born. Since before you were born, Dumbledore said quietly. Since before I was born, Harry repeated. He looked at the table for a moment. And you put me with the Dursleys. The Blood Ward kept me alive so I could be available for this. Harry's voice was even. Not angry, precise. I understand the logic. I'm not saying the logic is wrong. I'm saying the logic treated my life as an instrument rather than as a life, and I want you to say that out loud, clearly, so we're not pretending the decision was made for my benefit when it was made for the prophecies. The kitchen was so quiet that the range's small sounds were very loud. Sirius's hands, flat on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. Dumbledore said, "You're right." Harry looked at him. The decision was made with the prophecy in mind, Dumbledore said. The Blood Ward was protection, genuine protection, but the placement was also strategic. Keeping you outside the magical world, outside Voldemort's awareness, outside the political dynamics that would have formed around you had your existence been visible. I told myself the protection was the primary consideration. The strategy was always present. He paused. You deserve to know that. Yes, Harry said. I do. Remus made a sound that wasn't a word. He was looking at the table with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd suspected but had never wanted confirmed. Sirius said, very quietly, Albus. Dumbledore looked at him. I want to say something, Sirius said, and I want to say it without shouting, because I've made a decision that shouting doesn't accomplish what I need to accomplish here. Dumbledore inclined his head. You took my godson, Sirius said, and you put him somewhere you knew was inadequate, and you kept information from him about his own life for 16 years, and you managed the situation in a way that served your strategy first and his well-being at some much lower place on the list. And I know, that you were fighting a war with limited resources and imperfect options and that the alternative might have been worse. I'm not stupid. I understand the stakes. He stopped. But you need to understand that all of that is true and also what you did to him is true, and those two things existing simultaneously doesn't cancel either of them out. Dumbledore looked at Sirius for a long moment. Something happened in his expression that was not characteristic, a loosening, a giving way of something structural. You're right, he said. For the second time in 5 minutes. Harry watched this. He watched Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of the age, the person whose shadow had fallen over every decision made about Harry's life since before he was born, sit at a kitchen table and say you're right twice, and he thought about what it cost him. Not performance. Not management. Actual cost. He revised his assessment slightly. Not of what Dumbledore had done, that remained what it was, clear and documented and real. But of the man sitting in front of him. He was capable of this. That was information. I want to talk about occlumency, Harry said. The shift surprised both Sirius and Remus, he could see it. Dumbledore absorbed it more smoothly. Snape has offered to teach me again, Harry said. Properly this time, not the way we did it before. I'm going to take him up on it. But I also want to understand what I'm defending against, not just the mechanics but what the connection to Voldemort actually is, what it does, what it might do going forward. I need the full picture. The connection was forged the night he tried to kill you, Dumbledore said. When the killing curse rebounded, something passed between you, a fragment, for want of a better word, of himself. It's part of why you speak Parseltongue. It's part of why you sometimes sense his emotions. Harry was very still. A fragment of himself. Yes. You mean a piece of his soul. Dumbledore was quiet for exactly the wrong amount of time. Headmaster, Harry said, with the specific precision of someone who has identified an evasion and is choosing not to pretend they haven't, I need you to tell me what you know. Not what you think I can handle. What you actually know. Dumbledore looked at him, the full attention, the blue eyes, the weight of 150 years of accumulated knowledge and decision-making behind them. I have a theory, Dumbledore said. Not a certainty. A theory that I have been investigating for some time, and that I believe is correct, and that I intend to share with you, fully, when I have confirmed enough of it to be certain I'm not sending you toward a false conclusion. And when will that be? This year, I believe. He paused. I will not keep it from you a day longer than necessary. That is a promise, Harry. Not the kind I've been making, the kind framed as being in your interest. A direct promise. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Measuring it. He had two choices here. He could push, demand the theory now, incomplete as it was, and risk acting on information that turned out to be wrong, which Voldemort would exploit. Or he could hold Dumbledore to the direct promise and wait for the complete picture, maintaining what he'd established in this conversation, a new framework in which Dumbledore told him things rather than managing him. This year, Harry said. Before something else happens. Before I walk into something else I'm not prepared for. Yes, Dumbledore said. Then I'll hold you to that. Harry picked up his tea. Now. The Ministry and the Education Oversight Committee. Dumbledore blinked, a rare thing, that slight evidence of surprise. Kingsley briefed me yesterday, Harry said. If they put someone into Hogwarts who answers to fudge, the defense curriculum is at risk. I want to know what you're planning to do about it. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then, for the first time since he'd arrived, something like a smile, not the warm, grandfatherly one, something more genuine and slightly rueful. I have some plans, he said. I'd like to hear them. I expect you would. He leaned forward slightly. And I would like to hear your thoughts, as someone who will be inside the situation in a way I won't. Then let's talk, Harry said. They talked for 2 hours. What emerged from those 2 hours was not a plan in the finished sense, more like the frame of one, with several arguments still running inside it that hadn't been resolved. Dumbledore had a strategy for managing the ministry appointee that relied on institutional countermoves Harry thought were too slow. Harry had ideas about preparing the students themselves, training that didn't require institutional permission, that Dumbledore thought were too exposed. They were both right about the other's objections, and by the end of the 2 hours they'd found something in the middle that was better than either starting position. Sirius had contributed twice, both times with specific operational information that had come from his pre-Azkaban knowledge of ministry structures, which turned out to be more current than expected because some of those structures hadn't changed. Remus had contributed once, precisely, at exactly the right moment, and the precision of it had moved the conversation forward more than anything else said in the previous 20 minutes. At the end of it, Dumbledore stood to leave, and he paused in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at Harry with the expression that Harry still couldn't entirely read but that was more legible than it had been yesterday. I am not, indifferent to you as a person, Dumbledore said. I want you to know that. The decisions I made were wrong in the ways we've discussed. But they were not made from indifference. Harry looked at him. He thought about the weight of that, the distinction between negligence born of not caring and negligence born of caring wrongly. He thought about whether the distinction mattered, practically. It mattered, he decided. Not because it changed what had happened. Because it was true, and the truth of it was relevant to what came next. I know, he said. That's what makes it complicated. Dumbledore nodded. He looked, briefly, older than usual, not in the physical sense, he always looked ancient, but in the interior sense of someone who is carrying the weight of a specific kind of regret. He left. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Sirius said, "That was not how I expected that to go." "How did you expect it to go?" Harry asked. "I expected more shouting. Possibly some actual fire." He looked at Harry. "Where did that come from?" "The map room," Harry said. Looking at the board. "I kept thinking about what the most useful version of this conversation was, and it wasn't the version where I spent an hour being angry at him, even if I'm entitled to be." "You are entitled to be," Remus said. "Yeah. And I'll probably be angry at some point. But not today, and not in a way that costs us something we need." Remus looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing intermittently since Privet Drive, the one Harry couldn't fully name, that had grief in it and something that was not quite pride because pride implied a direction that didn't fit. Something more like recognition. "James would have said the same thing," Remus said quietly. "Eventually. He was angrier to start, but eventually he'd arrive at the same place." He paused. He had Lily's patience in the end. More than he'd have admitted. Harry thought about the photograph, his father's arm around his mother, the summer of '78, everyone young and alive and decided about each other. "Tell me about them," Harry said. Remus looked at him. Then, without any of the careful hedging that usually preceded these conversations, he just started talking. He talked about James and Lily in third year, when they couldn't stand each other for reasons that had more to do with James not yet understanding the difference between making an impression and making a fool of himself. He talked about the summer of fifth year when something shifted and nobody who knew them was surprised because it had been visible from the outside before it was visible from the inside. He talked about the specific way James laughed, which was too loud and absolutely genuine, and about Lily's habit of reading while walking which had been a hazard to everyone in her vicinity and about which she had felt no guilt whatsoever. Sirius joined in after a while. He didn't narrate so much as annotate, adding details, correcting small things with the authority of someone who had been there, going off on brief tangents about specific incidents that always landed somewhere funny. Harry sat and listened and let it fill him up. This was something he'd needed for a long time. Not the edited version, the full one. The one where his parents were real people with real flaws and real humor and real love, not the sacred version that people gave you when they were worried about upsetting you. The afternoon moved at its own pace. Harry spent an hour in the map room alone, updating his notes on the Voldemort activity patterns in light of what Dumbledore had shared during their conversation. The prophecy sat in the back of his mind like a stone in still water, present, weighty, its ripples moving through everything. He turned it over, examined it. Neither can live while the other survives. He'd been living that truth since he was 1 year old without knowing its shape. Now he knew its shape. It didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like a direction. He was pulling a piece of parchment toward him to write something down when the wards rang. Not the alarm level ring, the lower one, the frequency that meant someone was at the perimeter who knew the address and was being verified. 2 people. He heard Tonks's voice from the floor below, quick and sharp, and then footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the map room doorway, slightly out of breath, with her hair gone electric blue, which seemed to be her involuntary response to being startled in a good way. "Kingsley just sent word," she said. "It's Ron and Hermione." Harry was on his feet before she'd finished the sentence. He went down the stairs at a pace that was technically still descending rather than falling, and through the hallway, and the front door was already opening when he got there. Remus had gotten to it first. Ron was tall, which Harry always forgot between seeing him, and ginger, and was currently doing the face that Ron did when he was trying to decide whether to say the thing he was thinking or a more considered version of it. He took one look at Harry and apparently decided the unfiltered version was correct, because he said, "Bloody hell, mate," with a depth of feeling that communicated approximately 40 different things at once, and then stepped forward and the two of them did the brief, slightly awkward embrace of boys who have been friends for 5 years and have learned to show it in the ways available to them. Hermione was behind him and she hugged Harry with the particular Hermione quality of a hug, which was precise and total. She committed to it completely, her arms around him with the determination of someone who has decided something and is acting on it fully. He hugged back. "Your letter," he said into her hair. "I meant it," she said, into his shoulder. Then she stepped back and looked at him with the evaluating attention that she brought to most things, and something in her expression went through a complicated series of adjustments that ended somewhere in the vicinity of quiet anger. "You're thinner than you should be," she said. "I know. Dobby's working on it." "I know Dobby's working on it. I've heard about Dobby's meal plan from 3 separate people in the last 24 hours. She looked around the kitchen, which they'd moved into, and found Dobby immediately. "The schedule is excellent," she told him. Dobby's ears went up. "Miss Hermione is correct," she said. "You're right, I am, thank you." She sat down at the table. "Now, can someone tell me what the actual current intelligence is, because the briefings I've gotten from Mum have been very comprehensive on the nutritional front and somewhat thin on the strategic." "That's Mum," Ron said. He was looking around the kitchen with the comprehensive survey of someone cataloging resources. His eyes landed on the range. "Is there food?" "There is always food," Dobby said, with immense dignity. "Brilliant," Ron said, and sat down. Harry sat across from them both, and for the first time in 35 days the specific quality of his situation felt different, not better in a general sense, but specifically better in the way of having the right people in the room. Ron and Hermione were not complicated about their presence. They were simply there, fully, in the way they'd always been there, Ron with his absolute lack of performance, his straight-line emotional honesty, his complete inability to pretend things were fine when they weren't balanced by his absolute refusal to make things heavier than they needed to be. Hermione with her furious competence and her loyalty that was the structural foundation of everything she did. "Tell me what you know," Harry said. "The scroll got to Mum and Dad on Tuesday," Ron said, around a piece of bread. "And I've heard Mum angry before, mate. I've heard her do the full name thing at me, I've heard her when Ginny and the twins," he stopped, shook his head. This was different. She went very quiet. "That's worse." Harry nodded. "Dad made some calls from the ministry," Ron continued. "He has contacts in child services, the Muggle liaison side of things, because technically Privet Drive is Muggle jurisdiction first. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but he said consequences were appropriate and he had the right documentation, which I think is a ministry way of saying he's going to make sure something actually happens." Harry thought about Vernon's face when Tonks had mentioned the DMLE. "Good," he said. "Hermione's been up since 5 reading everything she can find about," Ron waved a hand. "Voldemort's historical strategies," Hermione said precisely. "Because if Snape's assessment is correct about the current consolidation phase, there are historical precedents from the First War that might give us useful patterns. And I found something." Both Harry and Ron looked at her. "The first time, in the 70s, the ministry's denial lasted almost 2 years after the first concrete evidence of his return," Hermione said. "And during that period, the most effective recruitment tool he had wasn't fear. It was information asymmetry. He knew things about people, compromising things, connections, secrets, and he used them to bring people in or neutralize their opposition without any visible action." She looked at Harry. "If he's using the same approach now, he doesn't just need ministry insiders. He needs the information architecture to stay unstable. He needs people not to trust the main official channels." So attacking the prophet, Harry said. Attacking through the prophet, Hermione corrected. Feeding stories, discrediting sources, making every piece of information feel suspect so that people stop trusting anything and just go with whoever feels most in control. Which, if the Ministry is the loudest voice and the Order is being framed as a fringe group, he wins the information war without firing a spell, Tonks said from the doorway. She'd been listening. Her hair was a thoughtful dark blue. That's what Snape was getting at in the meeting. We need counterintelligence, Hermione said. Something that doesn't rely on official channels. A way of getting accurate information out, that's a fifth-year problem, Harry said. When we're back at school. Right now the issue is the Ministry appointee. Umbridge, Hermione said. Everyone looked at her. Sorry, I've been listening to Dad's Ministry contacts through Percy, and there's a name that keeps coming up. Dolores Umbridge. She's Senior Undersecretary to Fudge. She's been involved in every anti-Dumbledore policy in the last 6 months and she has a specific view about Muggleborns and half-bloods that she hasn't published officially but is fairly obvious from her departmental decisions. Hermione said all of this with the expression of someone who has assembled an unpleasant picture and is presenting it with professional detachment. What kind of view? Tonks asked. The kind that ends in registration, Hermione said flatly. The word landed in the kitchen and everyone sat with what it meant. Harry thought about Voldemort's information asymmetry strategy and the Ministry's institutional denial and an Umbridge in Hogwarts with authority over defense curricula, and saw the full shape of it for the first time, not just the tactical pieces but the strategic architecture. The denial at the Ministry level, the corruption at the educational level, the information war in the press, the consolidation of his network in the background. All of it moving together. All of it designed to arrive at a moment when the resistance was too fractured and too discredited and too unprepared to mount anything coherent. We need students who can fight, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said. Not in the sense of combat, Harry said, though he was thinking about that too. In the sense of knowing. Understanding what they're in. Being able to think about it clearly rather than just react. A defense group, Ron said. He'd stopped eating. You and us, Harry said. Not just me. All three of us, and whoever else in the school gets it. We'll need a space, we'll need a plan, I can have a full curriculum outline ready before September 1st, Hermione said, with the look of someone who has been wanting someone to ask this specific question for some time. Of course you can, Ron said. I'll need access to the Grimmauld Place library, she said to Remus, who had come into the kitchen at some point during the conversation. Obviously, Remus said. He was smiling. I'll give you a list of the sections with the less hostile books. The hostile books are usually more useful, Hermione said. Fair point. I'll give you the sections in order of hostility with notes on handling. Harry looked around the kitchen, Tonks at the door, Remus moving to put the kettle on, Ron reaching for more bread, Hermione already pulling parchment toward her with the purposeful expression of someone beginning a project, Dobby watching the whole room with his enormous eyes and his ears at the attentive angle that meant he was happy with what he was seeing. This, Harry thought. This was the thing. Not the prophecy's shape, not Dumbledore's strategy, not the pattern on the map or the name Umbridge or the cold logic of what was coming. All of that was true and real and had to be dealt with. But underneath it, sustaining it, making it possible to walk toward all of it, this. These people. This kitchen. We need a name, Ron said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. For the group, Ron said. If we're doing this properly. We need a name. We have months to think about that, Hermione said. I want to think about it now, Ron said. I do my best thinking early. It's the afternoon. Early in conversations. Harry leaned back in his chair. The sun had moved to the west-facing window now, coming in at a low angle that made the kitchen warmer, and outside the London afternoon was doing what London afternoons did, which was to continue existing with magnificent indifference. He looked at the photograph of his parents by the range. His father, laughing, young and entirely himself, years before the weight came down. "We've got time," Harry said. "Let's think about it." Evening arrived with Molly Weasley's cooking and the specific noise of a full house. Ginny had come with her parents this time. She'd been kept back the day before, and she arrived with the bright-eyed directness that was her default mode, kissed Harry on the cheek in greeting with the complete lack of ceremony of someone who has made a decision about that and isn't going to make a performance of it, and immediately went to help Dobby, who looked slightly startled and then deeply, professionally satisfied by the assistance. The table was full. Molly at one end, Arthur at the other. Sirius between Bill and Tonks, animated in the way that only happened when the room had enough people in it to dilute the house's effect on him. Remus beside Harry, talking to Ron about something Quidditch adjacent. Hermione beside Ginny, the two of them deep in a conversation that had clearly been going on for some time and was punctuated by the kind of laughter that happens when two people discover they've been thinking the same thing. Kingsley arrived late, directly from the ministry, and ate standing up for the first 10 minutes because every seat was full. Moody appeared at the back door at some point and ate with the methodical efficiency of a man refueling rather than dining, his magical eye cycling through its surveillance rotation even at the table. Harry sat in the middle of it and ate Dobby's fourth nutritional restoration meal, embedded in a beef stew that was genuinely the best thing he'd eaten in recent memory, and said the things that needed saying and listened to the things worth listening to and let the rest of it wash over him like the background current of something good. After dinner, while the table was being cleared around them, Sirius leaned over and said quietly, "You all right?" "Yeah," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. "Actually." Harry thought about it. He thought about the day, Dumbledore in the morning, the prophecies shape out in the open finally, his parents in Remus's stories, Hermione and Ron arriving, the defense group taking form at the kitchen table. He thought about what he'd felt this morning when he woke up, the clean-scraped quality of the silence, the sense of a direction. "Actually," he confirmed. Sirius nodded. He looked across the table at the room, all of them, the whole loud crowded ordinary miracle of it. "James would have loved this," he said, quietly, to himself as much as to Harry. Harry looked at the room too. "Yeah," he said. "He would have." Later, when most people had gone and the house had quieted to its evening registers, Harry went back to the map room. He stood in front of the board and looked at it for a long time. The pins and connections, the patterns, the shape of what was coming. He thought about the prophecy. Marked as his equal. Not chosen as a weapon. Marked as an equal. He picked up a pin and placed it on the board, not at Privet Drive, not at Hogwarts. At Grimmauld Place. Here. Now. The point from which the rest of it would move. He stood back and looked at it. Then Dobby appeared with something hot to drink, and Harry sat down at the small desk in the corner of the map room and began to write. The note he sent was to Snape. It said, "I'm ready to start. HP." The reply came back 20 minutes later, which was very fast for Snape, and said, "Saturday. 9 o'clock. Do not be late." Harry looked at it. Thought about 4 years of potions. Thought about the conversation in the sitting room, the flat admission, the utility of what was being offered. He wrote back, "Fine. Bring the full theory of what the connection actually does. I'm not starting from incomplete information again." A longer pause this time. Then, agreed. Harry put the correspondence away and leaned back in the chair and looked at the map board and thought about everything that was coming. About Hogwarts in September and Umbridge and the defense group that didn't have a name yet and the prophecy and Voldemort's patient consolidation and the complete, total necessity of being prepared. He was not afraid of any of it. That was the thing he kept coming back to. Not that it wasn't dangerous, it was. Not that it wouldn't cost things, it would, probably things he couldn't see yet. But fear was a weight he'd been carrying for so long that he'd stopped being able to distinguish it from his own structure, and something in the last 3 days had separated them, and what was left, just him, without the fear, was more than sufficient. More than sufficient was, he thought, a reasonable start. Outside, London settled into its late summer night, and Grimmauld Place held its occupants in the darkness, and Harry Potter sat in the map room of his godfather's inherited house and looked at the shape of the war he was going to fight and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, completely ready. Chapter 5 Threshold Saturday came in grey and close, the kind of London morning that couldn't decide between rain and just the threat of it, the sky a single flat colour from one end to the other. Harry was up at 7, which had become his natural schedule after 3 nights of the half-dosed dreamless sleep and 2 nights without it at all, the sleep coming on its own now, still not perfect but consistently better than anything Privet Drive had offered. He was in the map room by 7:30, going through the updated board. Kingsley had been in the previous evening and added 3 new connections in the Death Eater network section, names Harry didn't recognize linked to names he did, the threads of association spreading outward from the known center like roots finding water. Moody had annotated 2 of them in his cramped, aggressive handwriting, confirmed beside one and watch beside the other, with 3 underlines on the second word that suggested the watching was urgent. He was still looking at it when Tonks appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs and an expression that suggested she'd been up for a while herself. "Snape arrives in an hour," she said. "How are you feeling about that?" "Fine," Harry said. She gave him the look she gave him when she thought fine was being used as punctuation rather than a real answer. "I mean it," he said. "I know what I'm going into. He told me what he wants to do differently and it makes sense. If the connection to Voldemort isn't closed properly it's a liability I can't afford." He took the mug she held out. "I'd rather spend a Saturday morning in a room with Snape doing something useful than spend it not doing something useful." "When you put it that way," Tonks said. "Where's Sirius?" "Still asleep. I checked." She came into the room and looked at the board. Her eyes went to Moody's annotations. "The watch one is a ministry connection," she said quietly. "Kingsley flagged it to me last night. The name under it has access to internal security briefings." Harry looked at the name. He'd seen it before, peripherally, in a report about ministry restructuring. "If Voldemort has someone that far inside, he can see every counter-move we make through official channels," Tonks said. "Then we stop making moves through official channels." She looked at him. "That's easier said." "I know. But the alternative is operating in a system that's already been read." He looked at the board again, at the shape of it. "Everything we do through the order has to be treated as potentially visible. It doesn't mean we stop, it means we layer. Keep the official moves happening, keep them visible, but do the actual work underneath." Tonks was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant operational shift." "That's what Voldemort is already doing," Harry said. "We're playing the visible game. He's playing the actual one." She looked at him with the expression that had become familiar over the last few days, the one where she was revising something. "I'm going to tell Kingsley this morning," she said. "Before the briefing." "Tell Remus too," Harry said. "And Sirius, when he's functional." "You could tell them." "I will. But you have the aura framing for it. It'll land differently from you than from me." She looked at him for one more second, then nodded and took her tea and went. Snape arrived at 9 o'clock with the absolute punctuality of someone for whom lateness was a moral position, and Harry was in the sitting room on the first floor when he heard the front door and Remus's voice in the hallway, and then footsteps on the stairs that had the specific rhythm of Snape's walk, economical, unhurried, not adjusted for the presence of others. He knocked on the sitting room door, which Harry thought was interesting given that Snape had been in this house more times than Harry had. "Come in," Harry said. Snape came in. He was in his teaching robes, which struck Harry as a deliberate choice, not the Death Eater robes he presumably kept for his other work, not casual clothes, the teaching ones. A signal about the nature of this meeting, or perhaps just habit. He looked around the room and then at Harry, and his expression was in its default configuration, which was to say it revealed nothing except the fact of his attention. He sat in the chair across from Harry without being invited, which Harry appreciated. Last year's sessions, Snape said, without preamble, failed for 2 reasons. The first was structural. I was deploying a full legitimacy assault rather than teaching you to build an actual defense. I was treating it as a test you were failing rather than a skill I was teaching. That was wrong. He said the last 3 words with the same flat precision Harry had come to recognize as his version of something that cost him something. And the second reason? Harry said. The second was relational, Snape said. We came into those sessions carrying 4 years of accumulated hostility and neither of us had the discipline to set it aside. I didn't have it. I won't flatter you by pretending you did either. He looked at Harry steadily. That will have to change for this to work. I won't apologize for the hostility again. I said what I said. But professionally, in these sessions, I am your teacher and you are my student, and the rest of it has to be left outside. Agreed, Harry said. What about the connection itself? You said you wanted to start from the full picture. Snape was quiet for a moment, and in the quality of that quiet Harry could see him making a decision about how much. The connection between you and the Dark Lord is not simply a residual scar, Snape said. Dumbledore believes, and I concur, based on what I observe in the Dark Lord's behavior, that the night of your parents' deaths created something more specific. A conduit. Bidirectional, though not equally so. He paused. He can access your emotions when the connection is open. Your pain amplifies his power in a small but real sense. Your anger is legible to him in ways that other people's is not. Harry absorbed this. So when I was angry at Umbridge, when I was angry at the Ministry, he felt the shape of your emotional state, Snape said. He cannot read your thoughts directly unless the connection is actively opened. But the emotional register, the broad architecture of what you're feeling, that leaks through. And from his end? More controlled. He has decades of occlumency practice and a temperament that runs cold under pressure. What you felt from him, the flashes of his emotion, the snake, the visions, those are moments when his control has slipped, or when he's deliberately pushed something through. Snape folded his hands. The visions are the most dangerous element. They can be manufactured. Harry went still. Manufactured. He knows the connection exists. He has known it since the graveyard confirmed it. A sufficiently emotional vision, targeted at someone you care about, sent through the connection when your defenses are down, would pull me toward exactly where he wants me, Harry said. Yes. Harry sat with this. He thought about the dreams he'd been having, the corridor, the door at the end of it, the persistent pull towards something at the Department of Mysteries. He'd thought it was just anxiety. He'd thought it was his subconscious processing the events of the graveyard. The corridor, he said. The dreams about the Department of Mysteries. Something moved through Snape's expression, sharp and fast and then controlled. Tell me exactly what you see, Snape said. Harry described it. The long corridor, the black door at the end, the sense of something behind it that he wanted to reach, not out of fear but out of something that felt like purpose, like recognition. He described it clearly, every detail he could remember, and Snape listened without interrupting, his expression doing the controlled processing that meant he was filing things in order of significance. When Harry finished, Snape was quiet for 4 full seconds. That is not anxiety, he said. That is precisely the kind of targeted suggestion I've described. He is feeding the dream. Not inventing it from nothing, using the real location, the real object, and shaping your response to it. Teaching you to want to go there. Why? Harry said. What's behind the door? The Hall of Prophecy, Snape said. Your prophecy. Physically recorded and stored. Harry understood immediately. If he can get me to go there and retrieve it, he cannot retrieve it himself. Only those named within a prophecy can take it from the shelf. If you go, and he has sufficient force in place, he gets the full prophecy, Harry said, and I walk into whatever he's set up around it. Yes. Harry looked at the fireplace. Thought about the corridor in the dream, the pull of it, the way it had felt purposeful rather than menacing, and now, knowing what he knew, understanding why. It had been designed to feel purposeful. It had been designed to feel like his. Right, he said. Then we start today. Now, if you're ready. Snape looked at him. You understand this will be uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than last year. Last year I was causing the discomfort, Snape said. This year I'm teaching you to prevent it. The mechanism is different. He paused. The entry point for building a real occlumency defense is not anger or force. It is clarity. The kind of clarity you were demonstrating earlier this week. He looked at Harry directly. Whatever you found in the last few days, that state of mind. That is the foundation. Occlumency builds from there. Harry thought about what Dobby had said. Dobby thinks Harry Potter decided to still be here. He thought about the feeling that had been underneath everything since Tuesday morning, not calm, exactly, not happiness, but the specific quality of a person who has located themselves. I know what you mean, he said. Good, Snape said. Then we begin. The session lasted 2 hours and was nothing like the previous year. Snape taught, methodically and without cruelty, which turned out to be a very different experience from Snape performing pedagogical assault. He explained the architecture of a mental defense not as a wall, walls could be breached, battered, climbed, but as a quality of attention. The ability to know your own mind clearly enough that an intrusion registered as foreign. The way you knew your own handwriting, your own voice. Not a barrier but a standard of comparison. Harry worked at it. He felt Snape's light probe twice, both times he was told in advance, both times he pushed back with something that was less force and more presence, just the solid fact of his own mind occupying the space fully, and both times Snape withdrew almost immediately. Better, Snape said, after the second one. That's it? Harry said. That's the principle. The application takes months. Snape looked at him with something that wasn't quite approval, more like professional interest. You have an unusually clear sense of self. For someone your age. Most 16-year-olds cannot find that ground quickly. Harry said nothing. He thought he could probably explain why he developed an unusually clear sense of self, but the explanation involved things that were in the diagnostic scroll and it wasn't the moment. We'll continue Thursday, Snape said. Thursday, Harry agreed. Snape stood, picked up his cloak from the back of the chair. At the door he paused, the same pause Harry had noticed before, the one that meant he was making a decision about whether to say the additional thing. The group you're forming, Snape said. For defense at Hogwarts. Harry looked at him carefully. How do you know about that? I don't know details. I know the shape of it from what Dumbledore said and what the intelligences available to me suggest about the coming year. He looked at Harry with an expression that was, as close as Snape could manage, direct. Stick to the practical. Dumbledore's army, he seemed to be trying the phrase, assessing it, or whatever you call it, will be most effective if the training prioritizes improvisation and rapid response over formal dueling methodology. The students you'll be working with won't get formal dueling training under whatever Umbridge deploys. Give them something that works in a corridor or a dark room without perfect conditions. He left. Harry sat in the empty room for a moment. Then he said, to nobody in particular, did Snape just help me? Apparently, Tonks said from the hallway. She'd clearly been nearby enough to hear. She leaned in the doorway. He does that sometimes. Usually disguised as something else. Why disguise it? Old habit, she said. He's been operating in a context where being helpful is dangerous for a long time. The disguise became reflexive. She tilted her head. The name, though. Dumbledore's army. Did he just suggest that? I think he just suggested that, Harry said. By lunchtime the rain had made up its mind and was doing it properly, the kind of London rain that wasn't dramatic about it, just thorough. The house felt smaller and warmer for it. Dobby had produced something elaborate for lunch that was the sixth scheduled nutritional restoration meal but disguised as a completely normal Saturday roast, and everyone was in the kitchen. Ron had stayed the night and was telling Ginny something about the Chudley Cannon's new keeper with the passionate hopelessness of someone who supports a fundamentally unsuccessful team on principle. Hermione was reading at the table with the comfortable capacity to follow two conversations simultaneously, responding to both Ron and Ginny's questions about the defense curriculum at appropriate intervals. Sirius was finally functional, which had required 2 cups of coffee and a piece of toast consumed in grim determined silence before he'd become verbally accessible. Harry was explaining the occlumency session to Remus when Moody arrived through the back door and tracked mud across the kitchen floor and didn't acknowledge it, which was just Moody. He looked at Harry immediately. His magical eye stopped its usual rotation. "The watch name on the board," he said. "Confirmed overnight." The room quieted. "Confirmed which way?" Kingsley said. He'd come in behind Moody. "Active," Moody said. He said it with the particular economy of someone who knows the weight of a word and doesn't waste the weight. "He's been passing operational security briefings. Not orders of the Phoenix specific, he doesn't have access to those. But Ministry counter-dark arts activity. The schedule of surveillance operations. Who we're watching." "So he knows who we're watching," Tonks said. "He knew who we were watching," Moody corrected. Past tense. "We've adjusted." He sat down at the table with the deliberate weight of a man whose joints had opinions about chairs and cold weather. The adjustment was Tonks's idea. Layered operations. Kingsley looked at Tonks. Tonks looked at Harry. Moody caught it. His magical eye moved. "Potter's idea originally," he said. "I can tell from the look on Shacklebolt's face." "Who briefed you?" "Nobody briefed me," Harry said. "It was obvious from the board." Moody looked at him for a moment with his real eye, which was the one that did the real assessment. "Good," he said. "Then, how's the occlumency going?" 2 hours this morning. Snape says Thursday. Snape teaching properly this time. Different experience, Harry said. Good, Moody said again. He reached across the table and helped himself to a piece of bread with the complete lack of social ceremony of a man who has been awake since before most people's alarms went off. "We have a different problem." "We have a lot of different problems," Sirius said, into his coffee. "This one's immediate," Moody said. 3 Death Eaters were in Surrey this morning. The kitchen went completely still. "Surrey," Remus said, very carefully. "Not Privet Drive," Moody said. 2 streets over. They weren't looking for the house, they were looking for the trail. They know he's been moved. They're trying to find the direction. How close did they get? Harry asked. "Close enough that I've been up since 4 in the morning, Moody said. He looked at Harry directly. "They'll widen the search radius. It's what you do when you can't find the specific location, you look for the person's patterns. Contacts, known associates, places of magical significance." "King's Cross," Hermione said immediately. "The Hogwarts Express." "Diagon Alley," Ron added. "Grimmauld Place itself, if they have a way to narrow the general area," Tonks said. "The Fidelius holds," Kingsley said. "They can't know the address." "They don't need the address," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "They need me to go somewhere they can intercept. That's the point. They can't come here. So they wait for me to come to them." He thought about what Snape had said. He is feeding the dream. Teaching you to want to go there. This isn't separate from the Department of Mysteries situation. This is part of the same strategy. Push me toward the prophecy from inside. Box me in from outside. Reduce the number of directions I can move. Moody was watching him with the evaluative intensity he'd been applying since the start of this conversation. "He's right," Moody said. "So what do we do?" Ron asked. "We move first," Harry said. Not toward where he wants us. We move in a direction that disrupts the pattern he's building. Meaning? Remus said. Harry looked at Moody. You said they were trying to find the trail. If we give them a trail that goes somewhere useless, and we make it look authentic, counterintelligence, Tonks said. She was sitting up straighter. We make them think they've found the direction I moved, Harry said. Somewhere with the right magical signature, somewhere that looks like where a protected person might be taken. We don't just hold still and wait for them to find us. We actively mislead. That requires someone to lay the trail, Kingsley said. I can do it, Tonks said. Not alone, Moody said. Remus and I, Tonks said. My metamorphmagus ability makes the signature plausible. I can layer magical traces in a way that looks like multiple people. Remus, you know the kind of protections that would be placed around a safe house. You can lay the defensive traces that would make the decoy look inhabited. She looked at Harry. How long do we need the misdirection to hold? Long enough to finish what we're doing here this summer, Harry said. Long enough to get to September in a position where we have what we need. 6 weeks, Tonks said to Moody. Can you manage 6 weeks of a convincing false trail? 5, Moody said. But I know the right location. Old safe house outside Edinburgh, decommissioned after the First War, enough residual magical signature to read as active if you know how to dress it. He looked at Remus. You know the place. I know the place, Remus said. Then we go tomorrow, Moody said. We go today, Tonks said. The trail cools fast. Moody looked at her. Today then. The planning moved fast after that, the way planning moved when the situation had already made several decisions and the humans were catching up. Kingsley drafted a secondary protocol for order communications that assumed the Ministry channel was compromised. Bill agreed to add a new ward layer to Grimmauld Place, something that would flag magical surveillance rather than just physical approach. Sirius, who had been listening with increasing focus, contributed a specific piece of information about the old Edinburgh property that changed Moody's assessment of its useful life from 5 weeks to 8. Harry watched it happening and felt something he'd only felt before in the middle of a Quidditch match, the specific aliveness of a situation moving at real speed, where the decisions mattered and the people making them were good. Ron was beside him, eating through the stress the way Ron ate through everything, and he said quietly, "You knew, didn't you? Before Moody came in. You knew something was coming." "I knew the direction was coming," Harry said. "Not the specific shape." "How?" "The board," Harry said. "And Snape's briefing. And just, the logic of it. Voldemort is patient and he's strategic, but he also wants this done. The longer I'm in a position of safety with support, the worse it is for him." Ron looked at him for a moment. The look he gave people when he was thinking something he wasn't sure he should say. "What?" Harry said. "Nothing bad," Ron said. "Just, you're different. Since Privet Drive." He paused, searching for the right word. "Not different in a worrying way. Different in a, you're more yourself. Does that make sense? It's like before you were," he tilted his hand side to side, "and now you're," he straightened his hand flat. "I don't know. I'm not good at this." "No, that makes sense," Harry said. "It does?" "Yeah." He thought about how to say it. "It's like I stopped spending energy on managing how I appeared. And all the energy that was going into that is now just available." Ron thought about this. "That's actually quite deep. Don't tell Hermione. She'll want to discuss it." "She'll find out anyway," Ron said. "She finds everything out." Hermione, across the table, didn't look up from her parchment. "I've been listening to this entire conversation," she said. "We know," Harry and Ron said, simultaneously. Ginny laughed, which broke something in the room, and Dobby produced dessert with the timing of someone who had been waiting for precisely the right moment, and for 20 minutes the war planning gave way to the uncomplicated noise of people who were glad to be in the same room. Tonks and Remus left at 2 in the afternoon. Moody went with them as far as the street and then veered off towards something he didn't explain, which was standard Moody. Kingsley went back to the ministry for an afternoon session that required him to continue appearing entirely normal at his desk, which he did with the unshakable composure of someone who had been doing that for years. The house was quieter. The rain was still going. Harry was in the upstairs corridor when he felt it. He'd been walking back from the map room toward the bathroom, thinking about nothing specific, when something moved at the edge of his perception, not a sound, not a sight, something interior. A flicker of sensation at the back of his skull, warm and wrong in the specific way of something that wasn't his. He stopped walking. He stood very still in the corridor and turned his full attention inward, the way Snape had been showing him this morning, not forcing, not reaching, just looking at what was there with clear eyes. And what was there was wrong. A pressure behind his scar, so faint he'd have missed it yesterday. Something pushing at the edge of his mental space from outside. Not a vision. Not yet. A probe. Testing. He closed his eyes. Found the ground Snape had been pointing at, the clear sense of his own mind, his own architecture, the standard against which foreign things registered as foreign. He felt the probe meet the edge of that attention and, not recoil, exactly, but pause. Register the resistance. He held it. Stayed present. Did not push back with force because Snape had specifically said force was wrong, just stayed, occupying the space fully, himself, nothing else, and after 45 seconds the pressure receded. Gone. He opened his eyes. His scar didn't hurt. That was new. That was different from every time before, the pain, the splitting headache, the involuntary response. This time he'd felt the probe and held it and it had withdrawn without costing him anything. 2 hours of Snape's teaching. 2 hours, and he'd done that. He stood in the corridor and breathed and thought about what Snape had said. He can access your emotions when the connection is open. Your pain amplifies his power. He thought about 4 years of that connection running loose, bleeding into both directions, leaking things he hadn't known he was leaking. He thought about what it would mean to have it fully closed, not as a wall, but as clarity. The clean, complete closure of a mind that knows itself. He went to find Sirius. Sirius was in the drawing room on the first floor, the dark one, with the covered furniture and the things on the walls that had probably made sense to a previous generation of blacks and made a kind of horrible sense now. He wasn't sitting. He was standing in front of the tapestry, the one that had the family tree burned into it, and he was looking at it with the expression of someone conducting a very old argument. He heard Harry and turned. "Map room?" Harry said. "Just looking," Sirius said. He glanced back at the tapestry. His own name was there, blasted out, a scorch mark where he should have been. His mother's handiwork, presumably, after he'd left. Around it, names Harry recognized, names he didn't. Bellatrix, connected in marriage to Rodolphus Lestrange. Narcissa. And beside her, in the smaller print of marriage rather than birth, Malfoy. Regulus, Harry said, reading another name. A death date below it, 1979. "My brother," Sirius said. "He joined Voldemort. Then something happened. He tried to get out, I think, or he did something against Voldemort, and they killed him." He said it without the specific weight of fresh grief, the older weight, the kind that had been carried long enough to become part of the person carrying it. "I never found out exactly what." Harry looked at the name. Thought about someone young enough to be someone's little brother, involved in something large enough to get himself killed trying to leave it. "Could be worth knowing," Harry said. "Why?" "If he turned against Voldemort, there's a reason. And if there's a reason specific to what Voldemort was doing, it might tell us something about what he was doing then." Harry looked at Sirius. "Do you know how he died? Or where?" Sirius shook his head slowly. "He disappeared in 1979. We heard he was dead just through the network. Nobody told us officially. He was 19. Harry filed it away. Not urgently, it was old. But it had the particular texture of a thing that was not finished despite being old, and old unfinished things had a way of maturing again when the situations that generated them recurred. Tonks and Remus, Harry said. They went to lay the false trail. I know. Are you all right with not being the one to go? Sirius looked at him. Ask me the real question. Harry looked at him. Are you all right with being here while other people do the field work? No, Sirius said, simply. I hate it. I've been hating it since I got here. I'm the wrong shape for this kind of war. I'm a field person, always have been, and the safe house is the right call, but it's slowly making me insane. He said it flatly, without drama, the way Snape said uncomfortable true things. But it's the right call. And I can do things from here that field people can't. The briefings, the intelligence analysis, keeping this place from feeling like a tomb. He paused. Keeping you from feeling like a tomb, more importantly. I don't feel like a tomb, Harry said. I know. That's what I'm managing. Sirius looked back at the tapestry. I'm very good at managing things. It's been underused in recent years. They stood in front of the family tree for a moment. The drawing room was cold and dim, the covered furniture like pale shapes in the low light, the tapestry's gold thread catching what there was of the afternoon from the blacked-out windows. Let's open the curtains in here, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Might as well, Harry said. Nobody's using this room. We should use it. He moved to the nearest window and took hold of the heavy drapes and pulled them back, and grey London light fell into the drawing room for what might have been the first time in decades. It didn't transform the room. It was still full of dark furniture and the family tree and its record of every terrible decision the House of Black had ever made, and the curtains themselves were slightly moth-eaten. But the light came in and the room was changed by it, and Sirius stood in the middle of it and looked at what the light revealed and didn't say anything, just nodded once to himself. Good, he said. That's better. The wards went off at 4:30. Not the verification frequency, the actual alarm. Sharp and directional, coming from the south side of the house, the sound of it cutting through the rain and the afternoon quiet like something physical. Harry was on his feet before it fully registered. He had his wand out before he'd processed why. He was in the corridor already when Sirius appeared from the drawing room with his wand raised and Kingsley's emergency signal lit at the tip, blue, the pre-agreed color for external contact, investigate. South Ward, Harry said. I know, Sirius said. Stay back, I won't, Harry said. Sirius looked at him for 1 second. Something was resolved in that second, something that had been building since Privet Drive, about the nature of the arrangement, about whether Harry was someone to be protected or someone to work alongside. It resolved quickly and correctly. South, Sirius said. Me first, you tight. They went down the stairs fast and quiet, the way you moved when the quiet was the thing keeping you safe, and into the back of the house. Bill had added a ward monitoring panel to the kitchen wall the previous day, 3 small lights, currently all lit, 1 red. Harry crossed to the kitchen door that led to the backyard. He pressed his back to the wall beside it, felt the magic of the ward pulsing through the door itself. How many, he said. Sirius touched the monitoring panel. His expression shifted. 1. But the signature is, he stopped. What? Familiar. He looked at Harry. I know this signature. He opened the door. The small yard was wet and grey and empty except for the rain and, sitting against the far wall under a dripping overhang with her knees drawn up and her face in her hands, was a girl. She was 17, possibly 18. Dark hair, wet through. Dressed in robes that had a Hogwarts cut but no house colors, the kind of generic uniform that second-hand shops sold. She heard the door and looked up and Harry registered the face, pale, frightened, but not weak, the frightened expression of someone who is frightened about something specific and is making calculations about whether the people in front of them are the right kind or the wrong kind. Harry had no idea who she was. Sirius clearly did. His wand was still raised, but the set of his shoulders had changed, the particular change of someone encountering something they weren't expecting in a direction that was neither threat nor comfort but something more complicated. "How did you get through the ward?" Sirius said. The girl looked at him. Then at Harry. She was holding something tightly in her right hand, a piece of parchment, crumpled from the rain. "Regulus gave me the address," she said. The rain fell steadily. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius was looking at the girl with an expression that was having a very busy time. "Regulus has been dead for 16 years, Sirius said. "I know," the girl said. "He gave it to me before he died." He said, she stopped, swallowed, looked down at the parchment in her hand. "He said if I ever needed to run, to go here. That someone here would help." She looked up. "He said to tell whoever answered the door that he was right about the locket." The silence that followed was long enough that the rain changed quality around it. "What locket?" Harry said. Sirius sat down on the wet step of the doorway. He sat with the specific weight of someone who has just had an old thing suddenly become a very present thing, and he looked at the girl in the yard and said, quietly, "You'd better come inside." She stood. She was taller than she'd looked sitting down, and despite everything, the wet clothes, the fear, the crumpled parchment, she had the bearing of someone who was used to standing straight regardless of the circumstances. She walked into the kitchen of Grimmauld Place and Sirius closed the door behind her and they stood in the warm kitchen with the rain still going on the windows and Dobby materializing from somewhere with towels, which was exactly the right response. Harry looked at her. She looked back at him with those calculating, frightened, resolute eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mira," she said. "Mira Rosier." Harry didn't know the name, but from the slight sound Sirius made behind him, it was recognizable, one of the Death Eater families, one of the old names on the wrong side of the war. A girl who'd run from that. A girl Regulus Black had trusted with this address 16 years ago and who had waited until now to use it. He thought about the old unfinished thing he'd filed away 30 minutes earlier, looking at the family tapestry. "Sit down," Harry said. "Tell us everything." She sat. She put the crumpled piece of parchment on the table and smoothed it with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, and she began. Chapter 6, After Mira Rosier's story took 2 hours to tell. Not because it was complicated, but because she told it carefully, the way someone tells a thing they've been carrying alone for a long time and have learned to be precise about, because precision was the only control available when everything else was out of control. She stopped when she needed to stop. She didn't apologize for the stops. Harry noticed that and catalogued it as something worth noting. She'd grown up in the Rosier household with the kind of upbringing that the diagnostic scroll would have recognized, different in its specifics from number 4, Privet Drive, but structurally similar in the ways that mattered. Her father, Corvin Rosier, was a cousin of Evan Rosier, who had died fighting Moody during the First War. The family had survived the Death Eater network's collapse in 1981 by being peripheral enough to claim ignorance, and had spent the next 14 years cultivating a very precise kind of surface respectability while keeping the interior life of the household exactly as it had always been. She'd been 12 when she found Regulus Black's letter. It had been tucked into the back of a hidden drawer in her father's study, a drawer she'd found by accident while looking for something else, as drawers like that were usually found. The letter was addressed to no one specific. It was addressed, in Regulus Black's handwriting, to whoever needs this. He wrote it before he died, she said. He wrote that he'd discovered something Voldemort had done to make himself, he used the word unkillable. She looked at Harry. He didn't use the word Horcrux. I looked that up later. But the description, the locket, Harry said. He said there was a locket. That he'd tried to destroy it. That he hadn't been able to but he'd taken it and hidden it, and the location was, she stopped. Looked at the parchment on the table. He wrote the location in the letter. I memorized it and then burned the letter because my father would have. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Where? Sirius said. He'd barely moved since sitting down. His coffee was cold and forgotten in front of him. A house, Mira said. A property in Bethnal Green. He called it a storage house, not a black family property officially, something older, something that predated the family registry. He said he'd hidden the locket there inside an object of no apparent magical significance. Why didn't you come sooner? Harry said. She looked at him. The calculation in her eyes, measuring how much truth was safe. She'd clearly been doing that her whole life and had gotten very good at deciding quickly. Because until 3 weeks ago I didn't know why it mattered, she said. I knew Regulus thought it was important. I knew he died for it. But I was 12 when I found the letter and I didn't understand what a Horcrux was, and by the time I was old enough to research it I was living in a household where that kind of research got you hit. She said the last part simply. When the scroll went out, she looked at Harry, and he understood immediately. You saw the diagnostic scroll. My father received a copy. He'd been contacted about order activity in Surrey, they thought he might have relevant information. He was angry about receiving it. She looked at the table. I took it from his desk and read it, and I knew who it was about, and I thought, she stopped, I thought if this person was able to send the truth out like that, to make people see it, then maybe the address on the letter was still good. She paused. And then I ran. The kitchen was very quiet. Harry looked at her across the table. He thought about a 12-year-old girl finding a dead man's letter in a hidden drawer and carrying it for 6 years through a household that hit people for researching the wrong things. He thought about the diagnostic scroll going out and reaching her like a signal, not a warning or a strategy, just the truth made visible, creating a path for someone who needed a path. Dobby, from beside the range, was very still. His enormous eyes were very bright. The Bethnal Green property, Sirius said. Do you have the exact address? Yes. She touched the parchment. But there's something else. Regulus wrote that the locket was protected, that he tried everything he knew to destroy it and failed, and that whatever destroyed it would have to be something beyond ordinary magic. She looked at Harry. He wrote that it might require a specific kind of power. Someone the Dark Lord had, she paused, finding the precise word from the letter she'd memorized, marked as an equal. The word landed in the kitchen exactly the way the prophecy had landed in Harry's mind 2 days earlier. Like confirmation. Like a shape appearing out of fog. He knew about the prophecy, Harry said. I think so, Mira said. Or something close to it. She looked at him steadily. I think he wrote that letter hoping the right person would find it. I think he planned for this possibility. Harry sat with that. A 19-year-old boy in 1979, who had joined Voldemort and discovered something that made him turn against everything he'd been raised toward, who had died trying to act on that turning, who had written a letter to whoever needs this and hidden it and trusted time to deliver it. He thought about the tapestry, Regulus's name, his blasted-out brother's name on either side of a gap, and how the gap had felt like loss without content until 20 minutes ago. Sirius, Harry said. Sirius was looking at the parchment. His jaw was working through something. He tried, Sirius said. Finally. Quietly. I thought, he stopped. I thought he was too far in. Too much like the rest of them. I didn't, he looked at the table. I didn't know. Harry said nothing. There was nothing to say about that particular grief that wouldn't make it worse. He let it be what it was. Remus and Tonks came back at 6:30, rain-soaked and tired in the productive way of people who have completed something, and the kitchen reformed around them with Dobby deploying dinner with the focused authority of someone who has been waiting for optimal conditions. Tonks took one look at Mira and then at Harry and said, "Right. Brief me." Harry briefed her. He was concise, the rosier background, the letter, the locket, the Bethnal Green address, the connection to the prophecy. Tonks listened with her aura attention, which was the kind that gathered everything and showed nothing back until it was ready. When he finished she said, "The locket is a Horcrux." "Yes. And if Dumbledore's theory, the one he's still completing, is about Horcruxes, then this is the first concrete physical one we know the location of," Harry said. "We need to tell Dumbledore tonight," Remus said. "We need to go to Bethnal Green tonight," Sirius said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Tonks said. "Dumbledore first," Harry said. Both Sirius and Remus looked at him. "Not because I'm deferring to him. Because the retrieval of a Horcrux needs to be handled correctly, and I don't know enough yet about what that requires." "He does. Getting it wrong wastes the opportunity." Sirius looked at him for a moment. "Right," he said. Tonks sent a Patronus to Dumbledore. Her Patronus was a jackrabbit, which seemed both surprising and exactly right, and got a reply in less than 15 minutes. He would come at 8. The reply came in silver light and his voice, calm and precise and carrying the quality it always carried of someone who had expected the unexpected. In the interval, Harry sat with Mira. The others gave them space without being asked, Remus finding something to do in the library, Tonks ostensibly helping Dobby, Ron and Hermione who had been upstairs all afternoon appearing briefly, registering the new person with various degrees of subtlety, and retreating again. Ron's registration had been a straightforward assessment followed by a nod. Hermione's had been a very fast, very comprehensive evaluation followed by catching Harry's eye and raising her eyebrows in a way that meant "I have opinions about this but I'll hold them." Mira was eating. Properly, steadily, the way someone eats when they're not sure when the next meal will be reliably available, but without the self-consciousness of performing it. Harry watched her and thought about the diagnostic scroll and about how hunger had a particular texture that you recognized in other people once you knew it from the inside. "What happens now?" she said. "You stay here," Harry said. "For now. The house is secure. Sirius is the secret keeper and you're already inside so you're covered by the Fidelius. I can't stay indefinitely." "Nobody's saying indefinitely," Harry said. "But tonight, and for as long as you need while we figure out what the locket means and what comes next." He looked at her. "You ran from your family. Do they know where you are?" "No." A pause. "They'll know I'm gone by morning." "Will they look?" She considered this with the flat assessment of someone who knows their family clearly and without illusion. "My father will look because I know things. Not just the locket, other things. Connections, names, meetings I wasn't supposed to know about." She paused. "I kept records." Harry looked at her sharply. "Where?" he said. "Safe," she said. "Not in the house." "I've been," she paused, and something moved across her face that was wry in a dark way, "I've been preparing to leave for about 2 years. The records are in a location nobody but me knows." "Can you get them?" "With help, yes." "Kingsley," Harry said to himself. Then to Mira, "We have an Auror. He'll know how to handle evidence of Death Eater activity correctly so it's actually useful rather than getting buried." Mira looked at him. She was doing the calculation again, the assessment. "You're very," she started. "Organized?" Harry said. "I was going to say confident," she said. "For someone who," she gestured at the house, at the situation. "I spent a long time not being confident," Harry said. "I'm making up for lost time." Something shifted in her expression, the calculation softening slightly into something more like recognition. Dumbledore arrived at 8 o'clock with McGonagall at his shoulder, which Harry hadn't expected but was glad of. McGonagall looked at Mira with the expression she brought to new students on their first day, comprehensive, fair, already forming an accurate assessment. They went to the map room. All of them, Harry, Sirius, Remus, Tonks, Mira, Dumbledore, McGonagall. Moody appeared through the back door at 8:10 as though he'd known, which he probably had through methods Harry didn't fully understand and didn't need to. Harry ran the briefing. He stood at the board and laid it out: Myra's background, the letter, the locket, the Bethnal Green address, Regulus's description of the protections, the connection to the prophecy reference and what it might mean for retrieval. He was concise and linear and didn't editorialize. He presented it as information. When he finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You've been busy," he said, with something in his voice that was not quite amusement and not quite admiration and was genuinely hard to categorize. "The situation was busy," Harry said. "I just kept up with it." Dumbledore looked at Mira. "Miss Rosier." "Headmaster," she said, with the careful neutrality of someone who doesn't know yet whether this is an ally or another authority to be navigated. "The locket Regulus describes is almost certainly a Horcrux," Dumbledore said, to the room. "For those who don't know the term," he looked around. "We all know the term," Harry said. "I told them when I briefed them." McGonagall made a sound. Harry couldn't tell if it was disapproval or something else. He looked at her. Her expression had the quality of someone recalibrating, again. "The Horcrux cannot be destroyed with standard magic," Dumbledore said. "The objects I have identified as candidates have shown resistance to everything but specific conditions: basilisk venom, fiend fire, the killing curse under specific circumstances." He paused. "However, retrieval is the first step. We need the locket in hand before we can determine the best approach to its destruction." "Tonight," Sirius said. "The trail is warm," Moody added, from the corner where he'd positioned himself. "Corvin Rosier will start looking for the girl by morning. If he has any connection to the Death Eater network probing Surrey, word gets back to the Dark Lord quickly. If the Dark Lord knows she ran, and has any reason to believe she knew something, he'll move on the Bethnal Green property," Harry said. "Or simply watch it," Remus said. "If he's already watching it, we've lost the window," Kingsley said. "If he's not, we have tonight." The room came to its decision without formal vote, the kind of decision that forms because everyone in the room has independently reached the same conclusion and the consensus is visible. "Who goes?" Sirius said. Harry said, "Me, you, Tonks, Moody." He looked at Dumbledore. "And you, if you'll come." Dumbledore looked at him. "You want me there. Your ability to work with whatever protective magic Regulus put in place will be useful. And if it's as heavily protected as the letter suggests, I'd rather have the most powerful wizard of the age in the room than manage without him." He paused. "That's not deference. That's resource allocation." Something happened in Dumbledore's expression that was the most genuinely surprised Harry had seen him. "Very well," he said. "Remus," Harry said. "Can you stay here with Mira, Ron, Hermione?" Remus nodded. He didn't argue about being left behind and Harry appreciated the understanding behind it. Someone had to hold the house, and Remus was the right choice for it, not because he was less capable but because he was the right shape for that particular function. "The records Mira mentioned," Harry said to Kingsley. "Can you be here tomorrow morning to take her statement and assess what she has?" "I'll be here at 9, Kingsley said. "Good." Harry looked around the room, the board with its pins, the maps, the faces of people who had arrived at the same point from very different directions and were now pointed the same way. "Everyone clear?" "One question," McGonagall said. Everyone looked at her. She was looking at Harry with the expression he recognized from 4 years of Transfiguration, the expression she used when a student had done something genuinely impressive and she was deciding how to respond to it. "Yes," Harry said. "Nothing," she said. "I was going to ask about the plan structure, but you've covered it." A pause. "It's a good plan." "Thank you, Professor," Harry said. And meant it, the same way he'd meant it at the table 2 days ago, specifically, without performance. They went to Bethnal Green at 10 o'clock. 5 of them, Harry, Sirius, Tonks, Moody, Dumbledore. They apparat to a Muggle Street 3 blocks from the address Mira had given them, arriving in the loose diamond formation that Moody had imposed as a condition of participation, and moved on foot through the late evening, the rain having finally given up a few hours earlier, the streets wet and reflective and quiet. The Bethnal Green property was a narrow building squeezed between two others that had been converted into something else decades ago, a storage facility, now boarded up on the ground floor, apparently uninhabited. But Harry could feel the magic on it from 20 feet away, the specific pressure of old protections, layers of them, carefully constructed and very patient. "Old work," Dumbledore said, stepping up beside him. "Pre-war. Regulus was talented." He said it with something that was unambiguously grief, briefly, before it was set aside. "The door?" Tonks said. "Give me a moment," Dumbledore said. He stood before the boarded entrance and looked at it with the attention he brought to everything, which was total. He extended his wand and moved it through a sequence Harry didn't fully follow, not a standard unlocking charm, something more like a conversation between his magic and the magic on the door. A negotiation. Harry watched it and filed everything he could identify. He'd been doing this since arriving at Grimmauld Place, watching how Dumbledore worked, and Moody worked, and Tonks worked, extracting what was transferable. Not performing observation. Actually learning. The door opened. Inside was dark and smelled of stone dust and old magic and something metallic underneath both. Moody went in first with his magical eye doing the work of the dark, and cleared the entrance with the efficiency of someone who had been entering dangerous buildings for 40 years. Harry went in second. Sirius and Tonks flanked. Dumbledore came last and light followed him in, not cast light, just light, attending him like weather. The ground floor was empty. The upper floor accessed by a narrow staircase in the back was where the magic was concentrated. Harry could feel it thickening as they ascended, the pressure of Regulus's protections increasing with each step. The room at the top was small. Bare floor, bare walls, one boarded window. In the center of the floor, inside a chalk circle that had been drawn with care and was still partially visible despite the decades, was an ordinary wooden box. Not locked. Not remarkable in any visible way. Just a box. But the protections around it were not ordinary. Moody stopped at the edge of the chalk circle. "Triple layered," he said. "Compulsion deterrent, memory disruption, and something else I can't identify." "The something else is a binding ward," Dumbledore said. He was standing at the edge of the circle, looking at the box with a focused attention that was different from his usual attention, more careful, more specific, with an edge of something Harry thought might be excitement. Regulus designed it to ensure that only someone of specific magical character could cross it. He anticipated the wrong kind of person finding this. "What defines the right kind?" Sirius said, from the doorway. His voice was very controlled. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Then, I believe the binding is keyed to intention, not identity. Someone who comes to destroy Voldemort, specifically, fundamentally, as a primary intent, can cross it. Someone who comes for any other purpose cannot." Harry stepped forward. "Harry," Sirius said. "I'm the right person," Harry said. Not boastfully. Just as fact, in the way the situation was a fact. He stepped to the edge of the chalk circle. He felt the magic push back against him immediately, not aggressively, but firmly, the way a door pushes back when it's locked and knows it. He stood with it. He thought about the occlumency work, the ground, the clarity, the sense of self as a standard. He applied the same thing here, not to his mind but to his intention. He thought about what he was doing and why, clearly and completely, without the management of it. Without performing the intention. Just having it. The pressure released. He stepped into the circle. The room felt different inside it, quieter, the magic of the protections now oriented around him rather than against him, and the box was in front of him on the floor and he crouched down and opened it. Inside, on a fold of black cloth, was a locket. Heavy gold, old, elaborate, a serpentine S worked into its face. It sat in the box looking completely innocuous and was absolutely not. Harry could feel something from it. Not warmth, not the simple magical resonance of an enchanted object, but something darker and more specific. A presence. Faint, contained, but present. He looked at it for a moment without touching it. It's real, he said. Something's in it. Yes, Dumbledore said, from outside the circle. His voice was careful in a way Harry hadn't heard from him before. Don't open it. Don't put it around your neck. Just bring it out. Harry wrapped the black cloth around the locket, lifting it with the cloth so he wasn't touching the gold directly. He stood up. He stepped back out of the circle and the protections closed behind him again, sealing the empty box. He held it out to Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment. He reached out and took it, carefully, with both hands, the way you take something important. He held it and something in his expression moved through several things too quickly to follow, and then settled into something that was very old and very resolved. Regulus, he said, quietly, to the room, or to the memory. Then, well done. Harry wasn't entirely sure if that was directed at him or at a 19-year-old who'd been dead for 16 years. He thought probably both. They were back at Grimmauld Place by midnight. The house was awake. Remus had clearly kept people up, which meant everyone was in the kitchen when they came through the back door, and the specific quality of the waiting that had been happening in the kitchen was legible in the way everyone stood when the door opened. Harry put the wrapped locket on the kitchen table. Everyone looked at it. It's confirmed, Dumbledore said. A Horcrux. We have it. Mira looked at the locket for a long moment. At the object that Regulus had died for, that she had carried knowledge of for 6 years, that she had trusted to the address in a dead man's letter and run from her family to deliver. Something moved through her expression that was complex enough to need time to process, and she gave it time, sitting with it fully rather than performing the response. Harry watched her and thought about what it was to carry something for 6 years and finally put it down. What happens to it now? Ron said. We keep it here, secured, while I complete my research into the method of destruction, Dumbledore said. I have leads I haven't fully pursued. There are others of these objects, I believe, and before we destroy one we need to understand all of them. Destroying one without the others would warn Voldemort and potentially accelerate his timeline. So we know where one is, Harry said. We need to find the others. Yes, Dumbledore said. He looked at Harry with the recalibrated attention he'd been deploying since Thursday's kitchen conversation. And I will need your help to find them. Not as a instrument. As a partner. He said the last word with the deliberate weight of a man who is choosing it specifically. Harry held his gaze. This year, he said. As we agreed. As we agreed, Dumbledore said. The house quieted by 2 in the morning. People found their way to beds with the gradual dispersal of a long day finally ending. Dumbledore and McGonagall left with the locket secured in a warded case that Dumbledore produced from somewhere. Harry noted the case and the warding sequence for later. Moody went out through the back and didn't say where. Kingsley departed for his flat and the work of continuing to appear normal at his ministry desk, which he would do tomorrow morning with the same unshakable composure. Mira was given the room next to Harry's, which had been cleared of the worst of the Black family decor by Sirius and Tonks in a project that had apparently taken most of the previous evening and involved a lot of things being consigned to a large bag. She stood in the doorway of it and looked at the clean, spare room and something in her posture changed, the bracing quality that she'd held all evening releasing slightly, the realization that this was a door she could close and have the room to herself. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Harry said. Thank Regulus. He set this up. She looked at him. You don't find it strange? That he planned for this? That he specifically anticipated someone like you? Harry thought about it. About a 19-year-old boy who'd seen what Voldemort had done and decided to act against it at the cost of his own life, who had written a letter to whoever needs this and trusted time to deliver it to the right hands. About the specific, almost architectural nature of that trust. No, Harry said. I find it, right. Like something being finished. She looked at him for another moment. Get some sleep, she said, which was the most unexpected thing anyone had said to him all day, and therefore the thing that made him actually want to laugh. He went to his room. He didn't sleep immediately. He sat on the edge of the bed with his wand on the nightstand and the photograph of his parents on the shelf and the window open to the London night, and he thought. He thought about the locket and what it meant. About Dumbledore's others, plural, careful, and what finding them would look like, and what it would cost, and whether the cost was something to be calculated against or simply walked toward. He thought about September and Hogwarts and Umbridge and the defense group that still didn't have a name, and about Hermione's curriculum outline that was probably already 3 pages long and had footnotes. He thought about Dobby, who had started all of this by doing the one thing nobody else had done, which was to look clearly at what was happening and refuse to manage it or minimize it or wait for a better moment. Who had simply made the truth visible and trusted the people who saw it to do something with it. He thought about the prophecy. Neither can live while the other survives. He'd been thinking about it the way you thought about a weight, something to be carried, something that pressed down. But sitting here now, tonight, after a week that had moved faster and further than he'd thought possible, he thought about it differently. Not as a weight. As a direction. Something that named where he was going rather than what was being done to him. There was a difference. He'd said something like it to Tonks on the roof, about the energy that was freed when you stopped performing smallness. He felt it now, sitting in the dark with London doing its London things outside the window. All of it pointed somewhere. Everything that had happened this week, every conversation and confrontation and careful truth, it was all pointed at something. At the place where this ended. He was ready to walk toward it. He heard a soft sound at the door and said, "Come in," and Dobby opened it, or rather his head appeared around it, because Dobby was too considerate to simply enter. "Harry Potter should be sleeping," Dobby said. Harry Potter was thinking, Harry said, which was what he'd said 3 nights ago, and Dobby's ears came up slightly at the familiarity of it. "Dobby will bring thinking tea," Dobby said. "Actually," Harry said, "sit down for a minute first." Dobby came in and sat in the chair by the door with the same careful ceremony as last time. But the startlement was less this time. He was getting used to being asked, which Harry thought was a meaningful change. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "When you sent the scrolls, when you decided to do it, were you afraid?" Dobby considered this seriously, with the care the question deserved. "Yes," he said. Dobby was afraid. Not of consequences for Dobby. Dobby was afraid it wouldn't work. That people would read the scroll and, he paused, finding the word, file it. Put it somewhere and continue as before. "But you sent them anyway." "Yes," Dobby said. Because not sending them was also a choice, and Dobby had already made that choice too many times by waiting. Harry looked at him. At the enormous eyes and the tea-cozy hat and the absolutely unshakable quality of his attention, which was the most constant thing Harry had known in 5 years of the magical world, more constant than Dumbledore's strategies, more constant than the Order's good intentions, more constant than anything institutional or structural. Just this, a small elf who had decided Harry Potter mattered and had organized his entire life around that decision without ever being asked. "I want to ask you something else," Harry said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not the way you think I want to be answered." Dobby tilted his head. "Do you want to stay?" Harry said. "Not at Hogwarts. Here. Working with us on this, the Order, the work of this year. Not as a house elf doing domestic service. As," he thought about how to say it, "as someone who's been part of this from the beginning." Dobby was very still. "Dobby is employed by Hogwarts," he said, carefully. "I know. I'm asking if you want to be part of this too." "Both things can be true." Harry looked at him steadily. "You've been fighting this war since you freed yourself from the Malfoys. You just haven't been officially acknowledged for it. I'm asking if you want to be." The silence was long. Dobby's ears were absolutely level, which Harry had learned meant he was processing something significant. "Yes," Dobby said. Quietly, with the weight of something very decided. Dobby would like that very much. Good, Harry said. He'd figure out the formal arrangements later, whether it required order approval or simply a conversation with Dumbledore or something else entirely. That was a tomorrow problem. Tonight, the question had been asked and answered, and that was the thing that mattered. Now the tea, Harry said. Now the tea, Dobby agreed, and disappeared to produce it. In the morning, Kingsley arrived at 9 with a leather case of documentation forms and the precise, unhurried manner of a man who knew how to make official things happen correctly. He sat with Mira in the small sitting room for 3 hours. Harry didn't listen in, it wasn't his information, it was hers, and she could decide what to do with it and how. But when they emerged at noon, Kingsley's case was significantly fuller and Mira had the look of someone who had put something down that had been physically heavy. "It's good material," Kingsley said to Harry, quietly, in the corridor. "Names, dates, locations. This will be useful to the right people in the right way." "Make sure it gets to the right people," Harry said. "I'll be careful," Kingsley said. He paused. "The Ministry channel is still compromised. I'll route this through the Auror office directly, below the level that the watch name can access." "Good." Kingsley left. The morning continued. The formal order meeting to address everything, the locket, Mira, the Bethnal Green operation, the updated communications protocols, happened that afternoon. Harry had been in enough of these now to read the room as it assembled. He saw Moody's satisfaction at how the false trail operation had gone, expressed in the form of slightly less aggressive body language than usual. He saw Bill's professional interest in the locket case that Dumbledore had brought and the warding he'd described. He saw Snape arrive and seat himself without making it an event, and catch Harry's eye briefly with a look that acknowledged Thursday's session and the Saturday's session and the compact between them without requiring language. He saw Sirius, and this was the thing that surprised him most, watching the room with something that was not quite peace but was adjacent to it. Not the contained fury or the barely managed energy that had characterized the first 2 days. Something more settled. It had a quality of resolution in it, the same quality as Mira putting down her document case. Regulus, Harry thought. Finding out that Regulus had tried. That mattered, for Sirius, in a way that nothing else in the week had quite managed. Dumbledore ran the meeting, but differently from the first one. The difference was structural. Harry had a seat at the table and used it, and when he used it Dumbledore responded rather than managed, and the room shifted its weight accordingly. Not every time, there were moments where Dumbledore's instinct was to contain rather than include, and Harry recognized them and pushed back on them specifically and without ceremony, and Dumbledore absorbed the pushback with what was increasingly genuine rather than performed openness. It wasn't perfect. Harry didn't expect perfect. He expected workable, and this was workable. The Hogwarts year, Harry said, when they'd been through the security protocols and the locket and Myra's intelligence. "I want to table what we're doing about Umbridge." "The appointment hasn't been confirmed," McGonagall said. "It will be," Harry said. "By August. We should assume it and plan accordingly." He looked around the table. "The defense group, we're calling it Dumbledore's Army." He saw Dumbledore's slight expression change and addressed it directly. "Not because it defers to you. Because it will drive Umbridge and Fudge mad, and that's useful." A beat of silence. Then Bill laughed, and Tonks grinned, and even Moody's expression did something that might have been appreciation. "The name is sound," Dumbledore said, with a dryness that Harry was starting to appreciate as his version of humor. "The curriculum will be practical," Harry continued. "Hermione has the outline, it's very comprehensive," Hermione said, from her seat. "And we start in September. Small group first, people we trust, then wider as we establish its working. The goal is students who can actually defend themselves, not students who can pass a theory exam while Umbridge pretends Voldemort doesn't exist." "We'll need a secure location inside Hogwarts," Remus said. "I'll find one," Harry said. He thought about the castle, its 7 years of habits, the places that knew him by now, the specific geography of a building he'd been navigating since he was 11. He'd find something. The meeting moved through its agenda and closed. People dispersed in the way of meetings that have actually done something, not the slow dissolution of people who've been through a process but the quick movement of people who have things to do now that the meeting has given them direction. Harry stayed at the table after most people had gone. He had his notes in front of him and he was writing something, a list, but not a to-do list. More like an inventory. Things known. Things in motion. Things still open. Tonks sat down beside him without asking. She looked at the inventory. Didn't comment on it. You know, she said, when the scroll went out, I thought we were going to Privet Drive to extract a traumatized 16-year-old from a bad situation. I thought the whole summer would be recovery. Healing. Figuring out what happened. And instead. Harry said. And instead you spent a week reorganizing the entire Order's operational framework, initiated a Horcrux retrieval mission, and formed a resistance movement. She looked at him. I mean, the healing is happening too. But it's not the only thing. It doesn't have to be the only thing, Harry said. No, she said. I think that's the thing I got wrong. I thought the two were separate, you dealing with what happened, and then you being able to function. I thought the dealing had to come first. She paused. But you deal with it while you function. They're the same process. Harry thought about that. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. It's a good way to be, she said. Not everybody manages it. I had good teachers, Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. Not school, he said. Just, people. The right people at the right time. He thought about Dobby on the Ollery ladder at 3 in the morning. About Remus telling his parents into existence over coffee. About Mira smoothing a crumpled parchment on a kitchen table and beginning. About Sirius in the map room with his hand on Harry's wrist. About McGonagall's precise, chosen apology. About Snape's flat, costly admissions and the acclimacy session that had given Harry something he'd needed before he'd fully known he needed it. About Ron saying you're more yourself with the direct simplicity of someone who noticed true things. About Hermione's letter, you don't have to earn your place with me. The kitchen was warm. Dobby was somewhere doing something necessary. Outside, the London afternoon was being an afternoon, unremarkable, ordinary, going on. What do you think is going to happen? Tonks said. A lot, Harry said. Helpful. I mean it genuinely, he said. A lot is going to happen. Some of it bad. Some of it, he looked at the table, at the inventory, at the list of things in motion, some of it worth it. Worth everything. He picked up his quill. Finished the inventory. He looked at it for a moment and then folded it and put it in his pocket. Okay, he said. What's next? 2 days before the end of July, Harry Potter turned 17. He woke up to the smell of something that Dobby had clearly started the previous evening and had been quietly perfecting through the night, and to the sound of the house being more occupied than was structurally sensible, and to Hedwig on the headboard looking at him with the calm patience of an owl who has seen stranger things and remains entirely composed. He lay for a moment looking at the ceiling, not the Privet Drive ceiling, not the water-stained Hungarian horntail. The grim old place ceiling, plaster and old, with the specific history of a house that had been through many things and was in the process of being through something else. He got up. Got dressed. Went downstairs. The kitchen was full. Not just orderful, genuinely full, the Weasley family in its essential configuration plus Hermione plus Tonks and Remus and Sirius and Dobby and Mira in the doorway looking at the chaos with the expression of someone who is not quite used to this but is not used to it either. Molly had brought a cake. It was enormous and not structurally sound and had Harry written on it in icing that was enthusiastically applied, and it sat on the kitchen table surrounded by a radius of other food that had the quality of Molly Weasley at maximum deployment. Ron was the first one to see him come down the stairs. He gave him the look, the simple, direct look of someone who has known you for 5 years and is glad about it, and said, "Happy birthday, mate." "Thanks," Harry said. He came into the kitchen. He was 17 years old, and the trace was lifted, and he could do magic outside school, which was a practical change with considerable implications. He could do magic outside school, and he was standing in the kitchen of his godfather's house with most of the people he cared about in it, and the locket was upstairs in its warded case, and he knew the shape of the prophecy, and Hogwarts was 6 weeks away, and there was an enormous structurally questionable cake on the table with his name on it. Sirius came through from the hallway and stopped when he saw Harry already in the kitchen, and the expression on his face was the one Harry had come to know as his most real one, not the Azkaban reserved control or the managed containment or the deliberate calmness he deployed in high-stakes situations, but the version underneath all of that, which was simply Sirius, undiluted, a person who loved someone and was not going to pretend he didn't. "Happy birthday," Sirius said. "Thanks," Harry said again. "Your father always made ridiculous requests on his birthday," Sirius said. "Whatever you want today, you get it. House rule." "That's a new house rule," Remus said, from the table. "I made it up 30 seconds ago," Sirius agreed. "It's still a rule." Harry looked around the kitchen. He looked at all of it, the people, the noise, the cake that was probably going to collapse before it was cut, the photograph of his parents by the range still propped against the orange juice glass, his mother laughing, his father's arm around her, Sirius in the background young and entirely himself. He thought about the week that had just happened. About Dobby at 3 in the morning in the Hogwarts Ollery, 16 scrolls in a canvas bag, doing the thing nobody else had thought to do or been willing to do, simply making the truth visible and trusting the rest to follow. The rest had followed. He thought about what was coming, the full scope of it, Hogwarts and Umbridge and Dumbledore's army and the Horcruxes and the prophecy and eventually, at the end of all of it, the thing the prophecy named. He thought about walking toward it the way he'd been walking all week, not toward the difficulty of it but toward the direction of it, with his eyes open and his mind clear and the right people alongside him. "I want to eat that cake before it falls over," Harry said. "And I want everyone to stay for the rest of the day." "Done," Sirius said. Dobby appeared at his elbow. Not with tea, just there, present, which was what Dobby did. Present and attentive and entirely himself. Harry looked at him. Dobby looked back, with the enormous, careful, completely committed eyes of someone who had decided years ago what mattered most and had never revised the decision. "Thank you," Harry said. For the 4th time. And it meant something different from each of the previous times, and it meant all of them at once. Dobby's chin went up. His ears were perfectly level. "You are very welcome, Harry Potter," he said. And the kitchen filled up with the noise of a birthday, and London went on outside the windows, and the house on Grimmauld Place held all of it, the grief and the history and the work still ahead and the people choosing to be there, and it was, improbably and entirely, enough.